All right, thank you, everybody. Welcome to the Grand Forks City Council meeting, Tuesday, February 22nd. Roll call, please, Maureen.
Weigel.
Here.
Doppler. Here. Weber.
Here.
Mock. Here. Kabami.
Here.
Sandy. Dana, are you on? And Bean?
Here. I see, Dana's on there.
Dana's on. I got you, Dana.
I see him online. All right, thank you. Item 1.2, Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, just got a couple of announcements on a recognition. Myself and Mayor Gander got asked from some faith leaders in the community to help be a part of the Day of Prayer. So the National Day of Prayer on Thursday, May 5th, we'll take part in that. So put that on your calendars if you're interested. We've got a recognition here. Miss Swantz from the Health Department want us to recognize a couple that has done a really great job over this past year. Dr. Brad and Gail Offit. So I want to give you a huge thanks for all their volunteering and all their efforts over this past year related to COVID-19. They've been helping out and volunteering, registering people. They've been both at the Alaris Center and the Grand Cities Mall. So they've heard a lot of personal stories, and they felt this opportunity was a really rewarding way to give back to the community. And Gail stated that this is one way to help our community by actually doing something. So I appreciate those words. So I want to thank both of them for their volunteering and for their help. That's all I got for mayor's announcements. So we'd move on to 2 awards, presentations, appointments, and proclamations. And I think that the COVID update got moved to the end of the agenda, so that'd be it for our 2. So we move on to public hearings and second readings of ordinances.
3.1 is a public hearing and determination of protests for the following, for the projects that are listed on your agenda. I won't read them all, but we have received no protests on any of these projects.
All right, so with that, I'm going to open up the public hearing for item 3.1. If there's anybody at this time to speak on item 3.1, A through F, now it would be your opportunity. All right, seeing none, the public hearing period is closed. So if you're looking for a motion to approve, motion from Councilmember Weber. We have a second from Mr. Veen. All those in, seeing no further comment, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. The motion carries unanimously. All right, we've got a number of action items tonight. I think we were thinking 2 main ones that we'd wanted to pull and talk about. So this time, if there's any other items beyond item 4.5 and 4.6 that council members wanted pulled, please let me know. Which one's this for? Okay.
We have a second? Can I ask something?
Not right now, sir. So I'd be... Can you get the volume turned up, please? All right, so we're looking for a motion on item 4.1, 4.2, 4.3, 4.4, 4.7, 4.8, 4.9, 4.10, 4.11, 4.12, 4.13, 4.14, 4.15, 4.16, 4.17, 4.18, 4.19. Let's start with those items. Do I get a motion to approve those items? Got a motion from Ms. Mock and a second from Mr. Weber. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Those motions carry unanimously. Now we got, let's do item 4.20. It's an introduction of an ordinance, and item 4.21. So if I get a motion to approve the introduction of those 2 ordinances, I'd appreciate it. Got a motion from Mr. Veen and a second from Mr. Weigel. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. We'll introduce those 2 ordinances for preliminary approval. Thank you.
All right, 4.5, introduction of ordinance and preliminary approval of ordinance related to hate crimes.
Thank you. Did we have, Mr. Gosta, did you have anything further, or Mr. Quinn, as far as that ordinance and the way it's been written, or what would be the update on that?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. What I did here is there are 5 ordinances. I was requested last week to draft the hate crime, I'll call them ordinances. The city already had a simple assault crime, so Section 1 is simple assault hate crime, Section 2 is criminal mischief, Section 3 is criminal mischief hate crime, Section 4 is harassment, and then Section 5 is harassment hate crime. And then what I did in the staff report is I just kind of provided a chart for the council so you can get a comparison as to the elements for each charge, and then hate crime and non-hate crime.
All right, thank you. I know we've got a number of people that are interested in speaking on this item. First, I guess, if council has any questions, and I've got a couple of questions, and then we can certainly move to those in the audience. Nope. All right, I guess the one question I got, I think we're probably all in agreement that this probably is something that should be debated and talked about at the state level. I understand that the circumstances hasn't worked out that way and in the favor that people are looking for, but we are attaching, hate crimes to the lowest level of crimes, which I think it should be done in the opposite way. So I'm hoping everybody agrees this is probably something that should be taken up at the state level and decisions made there. On that token, what's currently I've got some calls about how Minnesota and how that state has ran certain items related to this. Do you have an update on what Minnesota law is currently as opposed to the state of North Dakota? I think I'm understanding well on that, where that is.
I do, Mr. Mayor. The way Minnesota does it is they don't do it at a city level, they do it at a state level. They don't have a specific hate crime statute. What they have is the enhanced penalty. If a crime is motivated because of the victim or another's actual or perceived race, color, religion, sex, sexual orientation, disability, age, or national origin, what the prosecutor can do is seek an enhancement, and the way the enhancements work in Minnesota is that it takes the crime from the current level that it's at, if there's a hate crime bias, and moves it up to the next level. So if the crime normally would be a gross misdemeanor, it would move it up to a misdemeanor. If it's a misdemeanor, it would move it up to if it's a petty misdemeanor, it would move it up to a misdemeanor. If it's a misdemeanor, it would move it up to a gross misdemeanor. If it was a gross misdemeanor, it would move it up to a felony.
Okay, and how is that different from the ordinance that's proposed this evening?
So the ordinances that are proposed this evening, Mr. Mayor, are essentially because the city is limited by statute as to the offense levels that they can charge out. It's limited to a Class B misdemeanor, so both levels, both crimes are charged at the same level. So, for example, simple assault and simple assault hate crime, they're both charged out at Class B misdemeanors. Every ordinance that is proposed is limited at that Class B misdemeanor level.
Okay. All right. Well, we've got a number of names here, so I'm going to call you off, and feel free to... Mr. Weigel, you have a comment first, please. Go ahead.
I guess it's just a brief comment. As I've gone over this, is there a way that we can do an enhancement? I mean, we could put mandatory sentencing on there that the judge would have to follow, so we could do 14 days mandatory in jail and a minimum fine of $1,000, which would obviously take the discretion from the judge, correct?
Mr. Mayor and Council Member Weigel, correct. The enhancement couldn't be as far as the offense level. The enhancement could be related to the penalty. And then you're looking at a mandatory, either mandatory fine or mandatory time in imprisonment, and then that just goes back to the comments from last week about judicial discretion and how that affects those mandatory minimums.
Because the one thing I saw when I got some of the emails this week from supporters of the ordinance is that, I forget the exact wording, but essentially that it made it's an increased penalty. And I emailed back on one of them, and I said it's really not an increased penalty. It's no different than being found guilty of criminal mischief versus criminal mischief hate crime. They're the exact same penalty, and it's up to the judge at that point and what their discretion would be. I myself, I supported what we were doing last week. My personal opinion, I think that the enhancement, whether we want to put a mandatory time or a mandatory fine, is better. I think we already do that in North Dakota law with, if you assault a law enforcement officer. You could have a simple assault charge, but if it's a law enforcement officer, it's a felony. If it's a nurse, it's a felony. So we do an enhancement at the state level. Unfortunately, we do not have the ability to really do that minus mandatory sentencing or mandatory fines within municipal court.
Ms. Stockler, please.
So we actually had legislation that was introduced in the last session for hate crime ordinances, but it was labeled as bias bills that were not approved and moved through at the state level. So yes, ideally, we would have state legislation that deals with these kinds of crimes, but we don't. And so the next best thing to try and fill the gap if the federal government isn't going to take and charge is to look at it at a local level and try to fill in the gap and call an incident what it is in these egregious natures, and have a tool that is available to charge and seek justice for that individual that was a victim. So yes, I would love to see it at the state level. I'd love to work with you, Mr. Mayor, on that and introducing it. But right now, we're looking at what we can do in our jurisdiction as a city.
All right, any further comment by council at this point? All right, Mara Ferguson. There you are. And we've got a number, so I think if we can keep them shorter, that'd be helpful, but you feel free to use your time.
All right, good evening, everyone. My name is Mara Ferguson. This is Michelle Ridds. We are here on behalf of High Plains Fair Housing Center. And on behalf of High Plains Fair Housing Center, we would like to express our support to the hate crimes ordinance. We are based in Grand Forks, and we are a private nonprofit with a mission to strengthen communities and ensure equal access to fair housing in the region through training, education, enforcement, and advocacy. Fair housing is a right protected by federal and state laws. Fair housing means you may freely choose a place to live without regard to your race, color, religion, sex, national origin, or because you are disabled or have children in your family, and in North Dakota because you are on public assistance or because of your age or marital status. Nationwide, fair housing centers play a key role in responding to bias or hate crimes because of the alarming statistic that more than 30% of all bias or hate crimes happen at or near a person's home. The federal definition of hate crimes is a criminal offense against a person or property motivated in whole or in part by an offender's bias against a race, religion, disability, sexual orientation, ethnicity, gender, or gender identity. Hate itself is not a crime, and the FBI is mindful of protecting freedom of speech and other civil liberties. Hate crime legislation is nothing new. This work began in 1989 at a federal level with the George H.W. Bush administration and the Hate Crime Statistics Act. This work has continued throughout various administrations, many state legislatures, and many cities throughout the country. In just the past 2 years, cities such as North Liberty, Iowa, Lincoln, Nebraska, and Tulsa, Oklahoma, and closer to home, Fargo, North Dakota, have all enacted hate crime ordinances to provide additional protection for their residents. We believe it's time for Grand Forks to do the same. Hate crimes historically go vastly underreported. The Southern Poverty Law Center states that hate crimes are underreported by about 50%. This is for various reasons: lack of trust in systems, insufficient training to identify hate crimes, and various other barriers. Enacting this ordinance is an important first step in building trust with historically disenfranchised communities and will send a clear and consistent message from the City of Grand Forks that bias-motivated attacks are unacceptable in our community. In this way, we can be a leader for the state of North Dakota. Importantly, when bias-motivated crime is committed, often the victim's entire community is left feeling victimized, vulnerable, fearful, isolated, and unprotected by the law. Hate crimes are crimes motivated by bias against individuals of a protected class. The impact of bias-motivated crime is far greater than the already terrible impact on the individual. The damage to the very fabric of a community where a hate crime has occurred must also be taken into account. Hate crimes, in effect, create a kind of public injury because they rapidly erode public confidence in being kept free and safe from these crimes. To that extent, crimes of this nature can traumatize entire communities. Bias crimes hurt all levels of a community, and this is most certainly the right time for Grand Forks to convey that it will not tolerate crimes that intentionally send a message of fear to our neighbors. Thank you for your consideration and for making Grand Forks a more welcoming community with this action.
Thank you. Raquel Smith. And sure, I've got the addresses listed, so I'm not going to have anybody list their address as they go.
She's relinquishing her time.
Okay. All right. But I'm in favor, I'm guessing. Raquel. AJ Syrup? Is AJ here? Am I saying, yeah. AJ? I don't think it's a prank. Doesn't sound like one. All right. Mr. Coachman, Michael Coachman.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen of the council. My name is Michael Coachman, 405 Baird Avenue. You know, when I heard this topic last week, it reminded me of when I was running for governor for the state of North Dakota here in 2020. And as I traveled the state, the question was always brought up when I talked to a Spanish group or a Native American or LGBT and the Nigerians west of Fargo. And the same question has always been asked, what can you do for us? And I share two stories with them, and they will come together. My first story is I shared was, I never met my grandfather. My dad was born in 1930 when he was a small boy. He said when he was a little boy that these guys rode in on horses, better known as night riders, and they killed him. Right there. So I never got the opportunity to meet my grandfather. By the time he was 16, he joined the military. During his 20-year stint doing the military, he wasn't treated fair. But he always loved the flag, and he loved our nation. And I remember as a little boy when we were traveling from California all the way up to New York, where he was his next duty station, he wore his uniform. And that was for his safety, because he was in a military uniform. And I remember that we used to do a lot of picnics for the simple reason we couldn't go in the restaurants to eat. And we slept in the car a lot. But even after my father retired, he still loved the flag and he still loved the Constitution. What is ahead? The second story. I said, when I was joining the military in basic training, it didn't matter if you were black, white, red, whatever, rich, poor, had a high education or not. When we were in basic training, we all had to learn to work together. We had a common theme. Again, it was the flag, which I really appreciate. But if you notice, when we stood up and prayed, everybody stood up and prayed to that flag. So what is that? It's one of the symbols that we have. The second is this Constitution. When you read it, it's we the people. Because it's we the people, it's not we plus somebody else. It's not we in a special group. It's we the people. One of the most diversive things that we can do as a nation is start giving groups or individuals special treatment. Because then we are no longer we the people. Then that flag is no more. Lady Justice will no longer be blind. Because when you look at the law is even with everybody. And the one moment you start picking one group or another, Lady Justice is not blind anymore. And it's not fair. And then every other group will say, well, if they got special treatment, then we deserve special treatment. That is not the way we are here in America. It's we the people, one nation under God. And that's why we all stood, no matter how you believe, we all stood and saluted or put our hands over our heart to that flag. And that's why I say, do not support this for the simple reason this will cause division. Let me tell you something. You cannot regulate hate. You only can teach love. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Coachman. Peter Teft.
Hello, City Council. My name is Peter Teft. I'm here today to speak on behalf of friends of mine and family in the area to address the proposed hate crime legislation and hope that the council could clear some things up from the initial meeting about it. I'd like to also propose amendments to the legislation to avoid any unnecessary outcomes like we've seen in other places that have adopted such statutes. First, Officer Brian Sampson, American police officer, who ironically is also a member of the Human Rights Coalition, censored the conversation around the LGBTQ+ community and stated that's why we are coming forward to ask for hate crime legislation in the city to protect those in the federal government that the federal government will not bring forward. That way the city can step in and protect those who are protected classes. Councilwoman Dockler clarified what protected classes means by reading the Fed's definition, her words, and then listed off just about every category one could think of. It might have been easier just to tell us who isn't a protected class. Next, Officer Sampson went on to read statistics only covering a small portion of incidents where hate crimes were merely reported and not proven, but also a small portion of incidents where hate crimes were enforced, again, focusing on the LGBTQ+. So finally, my questions and suggestions for an amendment. When Officer Sampson said those that the federal government will not bring forward, I was wondering who he was referring to. The LGBTQ+ community is named in federal statutes. In the proposed bill, there is a section titled Conspiracy Against Rights. According to the ADL, a not so insignificant portion of America, believe me, many in the city too, see civil rights law and similar legislation such as the proposed hate crime bill here as a sort of an American Versailles Treaty, a conspiracy meant to deprive the white majority of their constitutional rights like free speech, despite Councilwoman Dockler's previous reassurance to the contrary. The only group not named explicitly in civil rights law or hate crime legislation is white people. It's white people who are the victims of the most interracial violence. White people are targeted and dehumanized by the federal government, and sadly it's white people that the hate crime laws have protected the least. Our suggestion for amending the legislation is to be, if it's to be passed at all, is to explicitly name white people as one of the protected classes you seek to carve out. Why? The failure to do so paints a target on white people, leaving the most vulnerable of us to even more risk. Fargo passed its hate crime legislation as a way to pay reparations for implicit bias and racism accusations levied on their city, and shortly after that, on camera, a Liberian immigrant murdered a young white girl, Jupiter Polson, in the most horrific, brutal attack probably in North Dakota history. No hate crime charges were even discussed, not even now, since the perpetrator has gone on to attack 4 more white people, corrections officers in the Cass County Jail. Our people are getting sick of all the anti-white discrimination. There are people in the halls of power with extreme dehumanizing beliefs that claim being white is merely a social construct and not a legitimate identity. I suggest the council make it clear you don't hold those extreme beliefs if you plan to pass this ADL-backed thought crime proposal. And the last thing, globalist liberals and Zionist conservatives alike want to make this about anything but an attack on white people. No matter what the council decides, they're all playing a big role in the rise of white populism and nationalism. Have a nice day.
Thank you. Jamie Hernandez.
Good evening, Council and Mayor. I just want to point something out really quick. As I listened to council members discuss the proposal of this, I listened closely as it was trying to be turned down in a way by picking apart this proposal within each individual pieces. As someone who has seen firsthand the dark side of hate crimes, I'm just going to read from this because it's a little bit easier for me. As someone who has seen firsthand the dark side of hate crimes and loss of life due to the simplicity of freedom of expression of the person's identity, I plead with the council that you seriously give this an in-depth thought. I myself have almost been a victim of a hate crime. I have witnessed hate crimes happen right in front of my eyes. These ordinances are there that need to be applied to those who need them. The fact of the matter is, I will gladly express to you why there's a difference between someone who is trans being beaten in public by people simply because of who they are, and the difference of someone who is cisgender, male, white, walking out the door. The difference is there's justice for the perpetrator that did it to someone who is cis and white versus someone who is trans and lost their life. One of the big things that I would like to point out is that another example for this, I have one word, pulse. Most of you woke up to it on the news. Most of you woke up to it and seen it on the news. I didn't wake up to it and see it on the news. No, I woke up to it and saw it on Snapchat as I had friends who were trapped inside of a bathroom, pleading for their life and showing people what was really going on. That a man had walked into a building and decided to open up arms on them simply because of who they were. When you walk out of your door every day, do you stand there in fear because of the color of your skin? Do you stand there in fear because of who you are? I just moved back up here from the south, coastal Georgia, southern coastal Georgia, in fact, only 2 cities away from where that boy was killed by 3 white men. And yes, I said it, white, because I am white. And it disgusts me when I see these things happen to communities that deserve better. Because why we need to be better for these communities. Every day. I watched as moving up here, I was misgendered every single day by people. Down south, not once was it even a question. Southern, coastal Georgia, the South. People that originally had racism in their hearts. And it was never a question. I want you to think about that.
Thank you. Where's Jules Amundsen?
Mr. Mayor, City Councilmen, and women, I have a little speech I want to say, but before I do that, I'm white, I'm a woman, I do not consider myself, seriously, it's ridiculous. Okay, I would like to share with you a message that was sent to me specifically about my sexuality, and I'm going to apologize for the harsh words that are going to come out. I might be right on the money about you being a dyke if you blocked me that much. You have to talk shit about me and say I'm a psycho. You're the cunt, the whore, the liar, and the dyke. You deserve a warm spot in hell, and you can hide behind your false salvation and your false Christianity, pretending you are all high and mighty, better than everyone else, and really you are just a dyke whore. That's not a Christian thing to be. I hope you get COVID-19 and die slowly. Wishing nothing but the worst for you. P.S. None of the bad things will happen to you by my hands. It will only be God and karma. This is not a threat. This is a hope that you will get a disease that's floating around already, possibly get in a car accident and die horribly. Goodbye. This was sent to me because I am a gay woman. Now, if you think that this is okay.
Miss Amundsen, can you address the city council, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
Sorry, Mr. Wojcicki.
Yep.
This was one of numerous messages I received. When I was finally sick of the harassment and became fearful, I brought all these messages to the police. They said they'll go and talk to the person and ask them to stop. It didn't stop. The vile waste continues. I was eventually granted a straightening order. When the judge granted the restraining order. They asked me why charges were never filed against this person. Now, do I think that these levels go to a hate crime? I'm not sure about that. I lived in a building that wasn't very secure, and because I was disabled from a head injury. And when I was home for my grandmother's 95th birthday, it was broken into. $20,000 worth of stuff stolen. But they broke into it because they were poor and they wanted stuff from it. That for sure wasn't a hate crime. They did it because they wanted stuff, not because I was gay. We want Grand Forks to be a welcoming community, yet I've been told that I am not a Christian because of my gayness. I have been told it's okay to be a Christian, but I can't make gayness part of my identity. How do I delete part of my identity? I can't. That I'm not a real Christian. That it's okay, but we don't need to see what goes on in your bedroom. Posting a picture of you with your loved one is not something that's going on in my bedroom. Sometimes, someone who's a heterosexual, they can post a picture of them with their spouse and nobody thinks anything of it. But someone who's gay posts a picture of them with their loved one and all of a sudden it's turned into a sexual thing.
About 15 more seconds if you can, please.
I thought we were going to have just as much time. No?
Oh, there's just so many. I'm trying to give everyone a chance.
I'll hurry up.
Not trying to stop you.
Got it. Mr. Mayor, you posted in your official capacity against a UND's policy that would have given a much-needed voice for trans students. The response to those posts was so disheartening. I think for me the most hurtful part was the amount of people who I knew and had called family that expressed their support for your position. We are just as whole and just as deserving of love and respect as every other person who is sharing the same freezing cold air here as everyone else. It took me 41 years to come out of the closet, and I am so blessed with a group of friends and family, but the fear of judgment of others and certain come true in a lot of cases. Importing this ordinance would help to those of us in protected classes. We feel like we wouldn't always be looking over our shoulder. We really did have a little extra, we'd have a little extra protection. I want to give a shout out to Alter, who has taken extra strides in implementing changes to be respectful. I applaud them for this. I think that we as a city can be a leader, not just for the LGBT community, but for all race, age, veteran status. If we can do something to help and make this better, please let's do that. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Jasmine Wood.
Hello, my name is Jasmine Wood, and I am a sophomore at the University of North Dakota here in Grand Forks. Today I would like to tell you a little bit about what I've experienced as a member of the LGBTQ+ community and how these ordinances would change my life and I believe several others. I grew up in a very small and conservative town in the middle of Minnesota. I was taught the perceived normal way of life and have been working to break these walls in my identity since. I came out at 15 as a sophomore in high school, and I've been dating the same girl since. In our hometown, we experience hate, shame, and abandonment. I no longer have a mom because of who I am, and fear that I would also lose my dad and the rest of my family if I was truly honest about who I want to be. Overall, I didn't feel safe or ever fully wanted in the place that was supposed to be my home. Coming here to Grand Forks was supposed to change that. Unfortunately, I can't say that it has. My girlfriend has lived here for 4 years, and I've been here for 2. We can't comfortably hold hands in public, day or night, without fear of retaliation. I worry walking from Columbia Hall to Memorial Union for queer and trans alliance meetings that people will attack after seeing me leave the Pride Center. The scariest thing about it is that I don't know if there would be punishment for the people who harassed or attacked me. The first time I felt safe and confident in myself and my relationship here was when BJ Armani's Cabaret came to campus for a drag show this year. They showed UND students the diversity and inclusion that I've longed to see since I came out. I felt so comfortable that I went to the full show the next night. 3 statements stood out to me, and they stay with me. Consent is mandatory. Black Lives Matter, because that was the first time I heard that out of someone's mouth since I got here. And this is a safe space. This is a safe space. These statements made me feel the safest I have in a long time. The beautiful humans there and here today instantly became a chosen family and gave me a sense of community. However, they can only do so much. Even though they'd love to, they can't protect all of us at the same time. Grand Forks and the legislature within it should give us the same feeling of community and safety, no matter who you are, on a day-to-day basis. We as humans should feel safe more than one night a month. I believe these ordinances will be a step in that direction. Thank you.
Thank you. Leo Ota. I think I'm saying that right. Can't remember.
It's okay. It's Audie,
Okay.
but it looks like a. So I'm gonna address something I heard a bit earlier. So I have a criminal justice and political science degrees. So I did learn about this a bit in school. So under race, I believe white is a race, and race is a protected class according to the federal legislation. Not gonna share my opinion on whether or not there's hate crimes against white people, because that's a whole other conversation and controversial, and there's a lot of people on both sides. But like I did last time, I would like to break it down a little to the base parts of what makes a crime. So in order to have a crime, you need actus reus, which is the harmful act, and mens rea, which is a state of mind. So hate crime is an addition to that. So like said earlier, that it would be an enhancement. So you have the physical crime of the assault, for example, and then to add to that, there's the hate crime, which adds a special penalty to that because it's a state of mind which is against somebody's race, somebody's sex, somebody's gender, anything like that. There's a whole list. I forgot to write it down on my paper. Katie has it. So it's not the fact of the crime itself, because we can prove there was an assault. It's the fact that the person doing the assault did the assault because of one of those protected classes. That's what we're debating here, is whether we add that to this city as an ordinance, because North Dakota, which I just found out today, does not have a hate crime ordinance at the state level. So, keeping that in mind, this is the perfect opportunity to show people in any of those protected classes that they are welcome here in Grand Forks. It's okay to have opinions. In the eyes of the law, it's okay to be a racist, it's okay to be sexist, but you can even share those on Facebook. But if you're going to go out and physically commit crimes because of it, that's where we run into legal trouble. It's not okay to threaten someone with harm because of those classes. That's where we look to you guys to protect us. That's where we look to you all to show people tolerance and kindness, and that it's not okay to do those things. We look to you to set an example in person and online that we're supposed to be kind to people, no matter who they are or what they are. So this is the perfect time to support this legislation and to pass it to show that support, to show that Grand Forks is a safe place to live. Thank you.
Thank you. Jacqueline, pass it. Okay.
I'm here speaking as a community member, although I have a lot of different roles in this community. I'm a member of the Grand Forks School Board. I work for the city as a health equity coordinator. I'm parts of various groups of people here in Grand Forks and do a lot of volunteer work. I have personally experienced workplace harassment, personal harassment, assault, and continued dissemination of inaccurate information about myself based on my gender and my sexual identity. In fact, there's some people in this room who have publicly stated they believe a lot of things that are inaccurate about me based on these biased motivations, including our own Dana Sandy here. And that's unfortunate. And I'm one story. I'm somebody who has some quote unquote power and status and some influence in this community. And I'm still someone who can become the victim of a lot of damage and a lot of hurt. And I have found myself being very fearful and hurt by a lot of things that have happened to me. Because when something happens to you based on an identity, you don't know how much further it's going to go. You can't just chalk it up to chance or somebody acting in bad will on a circumstance. Now, I don't know how other people get through it without a lot of supports, because I've been fortunate to be stubborn and have a lot of supports and keep going. But not everybody is so fortunate. Now, when we look at hate crime ordinances and legislation, usually there's two arguments against it. Usually it's, well, why don't we just call everything hateful then, right? Because isn't a crime hateful in its essence? Well, that kind of is inaccurate because the hate in a hate crime ordinance actually has to do with the biased motivation. It doesn't have to do with hate as in anger. And we already do, as Mr. Weigel had said, do penalty enhancements. We do aggregating factors all the time as policymakers, all the time. We decide that something is more important, a group of people are more vulnerable, and we put on enhancements because of it. Whether it's law enforcement, death of a child, et cetera, et cetera. The reason we do that is because it deters the actions based on that motivation. It deters those actions from occurring because people know that they're going to get additional hurt, additional crimes put on the record, whatever that might be. They're going to get flagged. It also allows us to start tracking data. So people can stop saying this doesn't happen, right? We have data about what's going on. The other thing that people usually argue about is, well, then isn't everyone going to cry hate, right? What about? The whataboutisms. And that's not true. It's underreported, similar to sexual assault. And the fact remains that, like as in my situations, we can't often prove those kinds of things because they're disguised under systematic powers, ignorance, all sorts of things. And it often becomes a he said, she said, they said type of situation. But it does allow for some power and for people to believe that they can start reporting things. It does allow for some opportunity in times when something is maybe stronger and we can start to gather that evidence. I don't think this goes far enough, but I do believe it's something that we need, and I believe it sends a message to our community, and I think that's probably the most important thing. And I would really caution people, if you find yourself agreeing with people like Mr. Tuft, who march with Nazis, you might want to reconsider your stance. Thank you for your time. I do hope you vote in favor of this.
Thank you. Mark Peterson. Second here, Mark Peterson.
Hello. All right. This is in regards to the hate crime ordinance. Number one, we're all Americans. We don't carve out protected classes or communities of people, especially those who identify by a letter of the alphabet, signifying their sexual desires. Doing so would show favoritism to those specific Americans. Two, as Americans, we all have the same God-given constitutional rights alluded to in the Declaration of Independence and solidified in the Constitution and subsequent amendments. All Americans are included in these documents. 3, we don't need to make things more complicated for officers or lawyers and take the chance of having an ambitious prosecutor going after Christian evangelists for perceived harassment for simply witnessing to someone or quoting passages of the Bible some people don't want to hear. 4, why don't we just simply prosecute criminals for the crimes that are already on the books, not muddy the waters with a nebulous ordinance. 5, with just about every crime committed against another person, there's usually some level of hate involved, so even discussing additional ordinances is fruitless. And as far as the Fufeng thing goes, if there's any hint that this is some sort of an infiltration operation, vote it down.
Thank you. All right, we've got a few more. Charles Vondel.
Mayor and Chamber, my name is Charles Vondel, and I stand before you not only as the resident of Grand Forks, but as one of the representatives of UND's Queer and Trans Alliance. As the president of QTA, I am sure I can speak for most of my members about our thoughts on the ordinance. We are in full support of the hate crime ordinance. Yes, we might be just college students, yet we are the future. One of the reasons we believe in the ordinance, it will protect the people of Grand Forks against bias. We believe it will protect hundreds, if not thousands of people that live in our city and in our county. No matter their age, sex, race, sexual orientation, gender identity, or religious belief. It would help individuals in this town feel safe. It would give them a peace of mind knowing that if something were to happen, it would not be pushed to the side. I'm sure people before me and after me will mention statistics. Like if you look at the U.S. Department of Justice information, you would find stats on North Dakota. But did you know in 2019 there were 20 hate crimes recorded in North Dakota, or 2.6 per 100,000 inhabitants? We had the 19th highest hate crime rate among the states, and in line with the hate crimes rate nationwide. Despite this, North Dakota also has a repetition for having a high rate of hate crimes, placing second in 2012, 2014, and 2015, except in 2013, when North Dakota actually topped with the list with 7.1 hate crimes per 100,000 people. I know that the hate crime ratio is slowly going down, and yet having second place for the repetition for having the highest rate crimes does not make North Dakota look good. We all know the North Dakota nice, but are we truly North Dakota nice? The truth is, we are sometimes afraid to stand up for what is right and what is honest, and sometimes it shows. Hence why Grand Forks needs to pass this ordinance. It would help protect and promote safer, cooler Grand Forks, and it also will promote more efforts statewide too, if it does pass. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah Gilbreth.
Hello, Mayor, City Council, and online. Known as the father of mindfulness, Thich Nhat Hanh wrote, "Understanding someone's suffering is the best gift you can give another person. Understanding is love's other name." I reread these words many times as someone who is active in their community. As a leader, as a parent, and as an educator, it is my responsibility to not only listen, but to also understand. I receive many messages from community members who are worried about how we are to approach our city government with this hate crime ordinance. There are community members that are genuinely concerned of the words that could be said today, as the meeting last week showed a lot of education and understanding is needed. Many of us watched as the city councilwoman introduced this ordinance and was met with the misunderstanding of why we need this ordinance. On a personal note, I saw her single-handedly educate every counterpoint that was made, and there was no room for public comment. So thank you. I also heard the reactions of those in attendance as some of the statements made by our city government came from a very remote understanding of their own community. This is not a new place for us to be in, but I am taking the fact that our own mayor was seen as apologetic to his own actions as a wonderful starting point to how I can react to last week and this ordinance that's in front of us. What should have been a positive discussion about how to help our marginalized communities turned into a public forum of how one becomes defensive when challenged in the world that needs more understanding. And on a personal note with that the state legislation, I'll drive if you want to introduce it. As a cisgendered white straight woman, I would never be able to understand completely how someone navigates their world when they are challenged in their workplace, in their school, with their religion, families, or by their governing bodies for their race, religion, gender, disability, sexual orientation, gender identity, national origin, veteran status, or ancestry. I work with all of these populations in the city and beyond to put together safe spaces of entertainment, education, and philanthropy. This was not always the case. Our journey with BGRMI's Cabaret has been a long-standing one. For the past 8+ years, we have cultivated a family, and through that family, we have found awareness to the needs of Grand Forks. I have been aware through these community events that hate crimes are not reported because there is a lack of education and understanding once something is reported. At any of these cabaret events, you will hear how BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color, and LGBTQIA2 Spirit Plus communities are a necessary cornerstone to the very success of any community. Again, necessary cornerstones to any successful community. If I did not continue to push this education during these community events I'm involved in, I would definitely be asked to step down and aside, as the expectation to me is to utilize my own privilege in a positive way. Directly addressing the comments of why do we need this ordinance is simple. I myself grew up in Jamestown, North Dakota. It was not until I entered the curriculum of secondary education that I was exposed to the real history that has shaped this country. The fact that our marginalized groups of BIPOC and LGBTQIA2 Spirit Plus are continuing to educate our own governments about racism, genocide, unfair work environments, inaccurate history curriculum, and the need for better support is exhausting for most of them. Having the privilege to navigate this world without having to fear of retaliation for the person I love, the color of my skin, the age I am, the gender identity I have, or my veteran status is a privilege I continue to be aware of because of the conversations I have with my own community and my own family. I am constantly challenged to be more mindful and aware of what I can do with this privilege. This is an honor for me to speak and to be aware of the importance of this ordinance. Tony Stark said it best when he said, "No amount of money ever bought a second of time." The time is now to show our city of Grand Forks that there is no room for hate, that we are learning as a community, and we truly will be a safe space for all. Thank you.
Thank you.
AJ wasn't able to speak before. They can speak now if you
Okay.
would call their name after this.
Claire Gaddy?
Claire, called to be a transgender apostle of Christ Jesus by the will of God. Transgender is the letter T, by the way. To the city of Grand Forks and to the city council, grace to you and peace from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ. If I punch a transgender person, or if I punch Councilman Weigel, is it really worse if I punch the transgender person? This was a question posed by Councilman Sandy last week. My friends and I gave a resounding yes. I pray that everyone learns from us tonight why we said yes. I will also submit that there is a more profound question behind the one you asked. If someone punches Councilman Weigel, someone punches Councilman Weigel, and if someone murders a transgender person, is it really worse to murder a transgender person? That is the question that gets to the heart of the matter. You see, minorities are often killed for what the majority are only hit for. On May 25th, 2020, George Floyd taught us this. And there are thousands of examples we can cite throughout history. Hate crimes are the highest priority of the FBI civil rights program because of the devastating impact they have on families and communities. The queer and trans community has a very long history riddled with ignorance, hate, prejudice, and murder toward us. We are a vulnerable group that is constantly targeted. When someone from the queer and trans community is assaulted or killed for who they are, it destroys that person and our entire community is shaken. For everyone that is killed, 10,000 hide and live out a painful, false existence out of fear for their safety. Consider that in Nazi Germany and occupied Europe, queer and trans people were among the groups targeted by the Holocaust. We have faced persecution in many nations throughout history. This is just one example. October 12, 1998. If you want a truly horrifying story, read about Matthew Shepard, a student who was tortured, beaten, and left to die for being gay. He was 22 years old. I quote a friend in Grand Forks, referring to their queer and trans students. I have heard stories of harassment, slurs, sexism, and attempts to dehumanize this group of people. When I was younger and told a friend that I was attracted to both men and women, that's more letters for those keeping track, his response was, "I thought you were smart. I thought you had morals." Jesus offers us a perspective on this. Throughout his ministry, he opposed injustice, argued with those in positions of power and privilege, healed the sick, and fed the poor. He befriended and made acquaintance with those whom society had deemed unworthy and outcast. Many of his parables are not just stories about being kind, but rather a serious critique of his audience, pointing out our failures and calling us to social justice. He holds a special place in his heart and in heaven for those treated unjustly and persecuted for who they are and their status in society. He calls people like this the least, not because they are less deserving or because he views them as less, but rather society sees them as the lowest. He is using their language to make plain what they are doing. Here are some of his direct quotes. The Gospel of Luke chapter 18, verse 18 is the story of the rich ruler. The rich ruler asked Jesus, "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" Jesus replies, "Sell all that you own and distribute the money to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven." The rich man was sad because he was very rich, and he wasn't able to do it. Jesus was calling him to place love for God and his neighbor above his wealth. The Gospel of Matthew chapter 20, verse 16. "So the last will be first, and the first will be last." Chapter 25, verse 40. "Truly I tell you, just as you did it to one of the least of these who are members of my family, you did it to me." Why did Jesus say these things? Because if we put ourselves and even our religion and worship practices above our care of other people, and especially if we wish or do them harm, listen carefully, Christians, we are not doing that of which God calls us to do. From chapter 22, verses 37 through 40. "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets." As stated previously, how we treat the least is how we treat God. If we treat the least poorly, we are not placing God first. If we do not love our neighbor, we are not loving God. And who is our neighbor? In the parable of the Good Samaritan, found in the Gospel of Luke chapter 25, we learn that our neighbor is everyone, including those who have discarded or cast us out, including those who live differently than we do. Many people don't need to stand up here and justify their existence, rights, and protection. We are still threatened by those in our nation with an obsession with controlling our bodies and whom we love. There is no honor in this, and it violates love your neighbor. A proposed
A few more, just try to finish up, Claire, sorry.
Raquel Smith donated her time.
We already went through that a week ago, so
Okay,
we gotta just, we're not allowed to do that, so please, I never like to cut anybody off when they're reading gospel, but please.
A proposed alternative to the hate crime ordinance was an enhancement to the charges. An enhancement is not enough. A friend of mine pointed out that the enhancement would likely be ineffective, as through negotiations and plea bargains, charges get dropped or modified, and any enhanced charges would likely be first to go. Let's call these what they are, hate crimes against innocent people with a tragic history that just want to be happy, productive citizens. We're coming from a place of love and inclusion, even when we are faced with hatred and discrimination. I'll close with a quote from the Apostle Paul in his letter to Christians in Corinth. 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 2. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith, so as to remove mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. My love be with all of you in Christ Jesus.
Thank you. All right, we've got three more. We got Sam Ryan.
Hello.
Howdy.
So I want to start with some scripture of my own. This is kind of off the cuff because I wasn't thinking about it. But Matthew 10:34 says, "Do not think that I came to bring peace on the earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword." All right, there's a difference between right and wrong, and I think that that's what we're here to talk about today. This legislation, in my opinion, is wrong. The hate crime ordinance is anti-white and is hateful in and of itself. The kind of legislation is used to stack charges on white people, while minority groups are seldom ever charged, as is the case in Fargo, with a Liberian immigrant that viciously murdered Jupiter Paulson, a 14-year-old white girl. Waukesha, Wisconsin is another instance of injustice, where hate crime charges were never levied against a black man who said he wanted to kill white people and then used his car to run down women and children at a Christmas parade. When a minority hurts a white person, the prosecution never presses hate crime charges. Prove to your constituents that you mean something else by passing this ordinance, or admit that you hate white people. And specifically, I'm talking about Ms. Dackler and you, sir.
Please address the council. Thanks.
Currently, white people are a simple majority demographic in this country, and they should be protected just like any other group. However, this is not the case. All a minority needs to do is claim that a white person called them a racial or sexual slur to justify brutally attacking them. This kind of ordinance weaponizes the legal system with retaliation for what is now a rising trend in the Western world. I'm talking, of course, about the evil of so-called social justice, which is not justice at all, as many of you know. Normal white people are scared of being called racist or sexist and losing their jobs or being labeled in a way that does not characterize them properly. We see this in the news, that people in bad situations now get prison time for doing what they thought was right in the moment. All in the name of social justice. People like Jesse Smollett create elaborate hoaxes for the purpose of riling up racial hatred towards white people. He did this as a ruse for the perception of a hate crime. In the past 2 years, there have only been 2 hate crimes in Grand Forks by Sampson's own admission. These are pretty tame numbers considering the potential for misuse of this ordinance to attack white people, to make white people the victims. The current statutes that would be used against someone of a supposed hate crime would, as I understand it, it would currently be a Class C felony for terrorizing or federal hate crime charges. Someone said earlier that the Aubrey brothers were, guilty of a hate crime. Well, they were convicted today, and they got federal hate crime charges, and they were found guilty. So don't be under the assumption that people aren't going to be found guilty for crimes that they commit. We already have laws in the books, all right? You cannot know what's in someone's mind at the time that they do something. You can only assume based on their prior statements, essentially giving those statements a 30-day jail sentence and calling it a hate crime. This does not meet the standard of what is reasonable. Some things that I think you guys could do to amend the current ordinance to make it a little bit more palatable. A revision or removal of point number 2 under the harassment portion, as it is too broad and it could refer to literally anything on the internet, and that is not acceptable. Also, I think that protections for political beliefs should be included, not just, the federal definition of what it means to be a special protected class or whatever. And to really justify this for a majority white population in Grand Forks, you should specify white people as a protected class. I think that's only reasonable. A citizen oversight committee that accurately reflects the demographics of the city review every alleged hate crime case. So you guys select people that make up Grand Forks based off of racial demographics, because that's what we're doing, right? We're talking about hate crimes, okay? You guys need to reflect that when it comes to actually charging someone with a hate crime. I think that's ridiculous to put it in the hands of a prosecutor, because prosecutors change seats all the time, and it's an elected position, all right? We are the repressed and silent white majority. We are the largest bloc of voters in Grand Forks. We do not vote for communists that back Chinese CCP, Fufeng, or any other insane politically correct nonsense. Your political careers, both liberal and conservative, can't handle the weight of the agenda that you are trying to shove down our throats. And that's it. You guys have any questions?
I don't think we're doing question and answer, but thank you. All right, we got two more here. Leah Hirsch.
Wow, that was awful to hear. As a white person, I'm not afraid of being charged of a hate crime because I don't go out and say blatantly racist and homophobic things. That's just... I'm just saying. But today I come to you with my experience of moving to the city of Grand Forks. When I moved here, I was not welcomed. Pardon my language, but whenever I was walking through the mall, somebody called me a faggot just because I had short hair. Hate here in Grand Forks is real. And I want you to know that, and I want you to see that, and I want you to help protect these people by passing this ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you. Will Lovelace. Last then, AJ, I'm assuming you're in support of the ordinance. So where's AJ at? Just can you give me a thumbs up, or we're going to go with Will. I know you missed your spot, but if you could just say that you're a proponent or opponent, please.
I'm whether I'm a proponent or opponent of the hate crime ordinance.
Not you, sir.
Okay.
But you can.
Well,
also,
I am a proponent.
Yeah, you can also feel free. Yeah.
I've sent an email to the council, and you've heard my arguments. They're the same as many of the arguments that the people here have made in support of the ordinance. It took a lot of, I think it takes a lot of courage for them to come up here and speak their truth. I think their truth is a lot more painful than my truth and the realities that many of you live in. Just to reiterate some things, violence motivated by hate is in North Dakota. We've already established that. It's in the city of Grand Forks. So what are we going to do about it? If we lived in a just society, I don't think we would need to have these kinds of things, but we don't live in a just society. And to the folks saying that, pointing at a piece of paper and saying that we're all treated equal, all you have to do is Google some stats and see that we are not treated equal. I'd also like to point out that an open Nazi stood up here and argued against the hate crime ordinance as written. So if that's not a reason to vote for it, I don't know what is. The argument of white discrimination is a myth, and it's a Nazi myth. So to the folks that, or those on the council that might have been nodding along to that argument, you're agreeing with a Nazi. I'd also like to point out to the council that we've allowed a platform to at least one and maybe two Nazis. So what are we going to do about it? Thank you.
All right, I'm going to open it up to council now for comment and any motions they'd like to make. So who would like to go first? Mr. Weigel.
Can I ask a question? And whoever would like to answer it, I'm okay with that. So as I talked about earlier, we talked about the enhancements versus just the ordinance in itself. The tough part with the ordinance in itself is you have to prove that fourth element to a jury or to a judge, depending on what trial you have. So that element makes it more difficult. With the enhancement, you're only proving the three elements, which makes it easier to convict. But on the flip side, you still have the enhancement that can also be tacked on top of it. Would that be correct, Mr. Gosted? You could be found guilty of the crime. You could also be found guilty of the enhancement or not guilty of the enhancement.
That's my understanding, is that, for example, if we didn't have the ordinance that my partner, Mr. Quinn, drafted, and he did a great job, and I think he was suggesting this at the last meeting, this is a possibility, is that if you prove those elements, you've proven the crime beyond a reasonable doubt, and then the enhancement would simply be what the imposed penalty would be against that individual in those set of circumstances. So you don't have to prove another, that you suggested you don't have to prove another element.
Okay. So I personally, I like the enhancement. I think it makes it easier to prove. And then the enhancement on top of it, whereas I think the ordinance as it's written is going to be very difficult to prove in a courtroom. And that's what I worry about. I voted for this last week, but I also think that it's important that if we're going to go forward with something along these lines, that if it's warranted, then it's used, but at the same time that it can actually be used. I'm not so sure without something that everybody can see, I'm not sure that you get a conviction on some of these things, and that's what I worry about. And just to point out, our city prosecutor isn't elected, they're appointed by our city attorney, so, you know, yes, they come and go, but I've got the most faith of any city prosecutor I've ever met, or any prosecutor that I've ever met in Ms. Pettit. So I trust her judgment on nearly everything, so just to kind of want to clarify a couple of those things.
Thank you, Mr. Weigel. Mr. Weber.
Based on the recommendation from the Committee of the Whole last week and the response that we have from the City Attorney's Office, I'll move approval.
Got a motion to approve. Is there a second? Ms. Dockler seconds that motion. Further comment? Mr. Kavami or Mr. Sandy online, any comments?
No, thank you.
Mr. Kavami, any comments?
No, thank you.
All right, seeing no further comments, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed, same sign. That motion carries unanimously. All right, Mr. Gosted, I think we got some people that are going to shuffle for the next item. Could we, do we need a motion for like a 5-minute recess to get shuffled, or is that something the chair can do on his own?
I think you can declare a recess for a period of time.
We're going to just declare the 5-minute recess here, and then we'll get into item 4.6. I know we got people online that are waiting, but we can at least shuffle some chairs here because we got a full room. So thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead if you want to call in item 4.6.
Fufeng Wet Corn Mill.
All right, Mr. Field, did you have Mr. Gosted? Did Mr. Gosted have some items to start with? Okay, please, Mr. Gosted.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor, council members. I wanted to give you an update. We had a communication or discussion yesterday, late yesterday afternoon with Mr. Shudrash and Mr. Ram, the attorney for Fufeng, to discuss some items that, some modifications to the agreement that I don't think are necessarily huge substantive changes, but I wanted to alert the council of those items so that if any motion is made, these amendments would be part of that particular motion. Yep. First, you'll notice in the development agreement, the name of the developer hasn't been inserted. That was an oversight. It's always been Fufeng USA Incorporated. I've known that for a while. I've been focusing on the substantive provisions. So that'll be included. Section 1.46 is the description of the letter of credit. We had originally included a specific name of a financial institution. Fufeng wants to have some flexibility on the name of or who the financial institution would be for that letter of credit. Using what they've been requested for their Viking, the natural gas, because they're providing a letter of credit there as well, that there'll be certain minimum standards, Standard & Poor's level rating or Moody's rating. I think with the Viking, it's an A- or higher, and with the Moody's rating, it's a A3 or higher. I didn't have any issue with that as long as we had a sufficiently strong financial institution with those type of ratings or higher. We haven't made a determination yet, but I just wanted to alert the council that the name of the financial institution may not be within that particular section. Rather, the rating of the financial institution will be inserted. It will also include that the bank is subject to and must comply with U.S. banking laws and regulations. Next item is with respect to the escrow. Originally, Fufeng had thought that we'd use a third-party escrow agent to manage these funds, and they have said that that's not necessary. We'd just deposit the money into a financial institution. A couple of the financial institutions that were bantered around during the discussion, again, nothing has been solidified, would be Wells Fargo or a Bank of North Dakota if they could hold those funds. That would be, and these are the funds that would be used for the design, construction, and the outside engineer oversight for the raw water and the wastewater components. The other item that was discussed was the timing of when those escrow deposits would be made. There'll be a delay because there's really not a need for the deposit of money until we start getting into the construction. So the timing of the deposit will be shortly after the award of the contract for the construction of the raw water, the wastewater, within days. After the council would award that. The award by the council to approve those infrastructure components would of course be contingent upon those funds being deposited. And we'd add this as another condition in section 8.1 of the development agreement that lists the 20-odd conditions, that a condition would be that those escrow funds get deposited. After the award of the contract, and again, the award of the contract would be conditioned upon those funds being deposited. Another item is there is discussion about Fufeng wanting to receive back the escrow funds under certain circumstances. After the contract's been awarded, they've deposited the funds, for example. The concern would be if the council would happen to vote to basically terminate that construction contract under those set of circumstances. They'd want their funds back. It would seem reasonable to me, although I don't think that's a likelihood that the council would would terminate the contract without having a basis. We're not talking about a termination of the contract for contractor performance. They were just concerned of the possibility that the council might decide not to go forward with the construction of the contract. The other element is that they were talking about is that if there was some event that would make it impossible to complete the construction of the infrastructure. And the example that I provided them today was a natural catastrophe, act of war, terrorism, or even an order from some governmental body in the United States that had jurisdiction to issue a decree to stop. Under those set of circumstances, nobody would be able to complete the infrastructure. And at that point, whatever would be left would be returned to them. And that seemed like a reasonable compromise as well. And then the last item, or two more items, in section 8.3, there was some items of work that were requested to be completed before all the conditions are satisfied. And again, that work is covered by the letter of credit, if you recall. We haven't gotten that list yet. And so the thought process is that that provision will be modified such that once we get those items that they want to be completed before the conditions, we would come back to the council to get your approval on those items. There might be an exception if there was something below the administrative amount that the administration can approve. I think it's a $50,000 number. Those type of things we'd just administratively handle. But if there was this infrastructure item that was beyond the scope of what administration can do, those would come back to the council. So that change would be made because we just haven't gotten that information yet. And it gives you some assurance, the council members assurance that things like that will come back to the council. And again, it make the statement again that this agreement is a starting point. I would expect more things will come back to the council as we progress through the due diligence that's set forth in the development agreement itself. And one of those items is the natural gas. There is, if you recall, there is a discussion of increasing the size of the pipe that would provide a larger quantity of natural gas that could be provided to the city. It's beyond what they would need, but it adds capacity to natural gas within the city. There's a lot of variables that have not been decided on that. We still need some more information, but that would be another example that if the city, and I think the ask was like $500,000 to contribute to that natural gas line pipeline to increase the size of the pipe, that increases the capacity. It's not necessary for Fufeng's operation today, but it allows for a larger capacity to the city. We'd come back to the city council if we're in a position to, the administration is in a position to make a recommendation on those items. So I just wanted to go through those with you. Again, I didn't see anything that was earth-shattering or that would cause any concern on my part, and it seemed reasonable on those items. So I'm open to any questions you may have with respect to those additions. And to the extent that there is a motion on this development agreement, I want to make it clear that those additions would be part of that motion.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Gostad. So if there's any questions on that related part, now, please go ahead. But then I want to introduce the guests up there, and then we'll kind of talk about it. But we'll go ahead and ask it on that part first, Brett.
Very quickly, I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this. You mentioned $50,000 administrative discretion. That would be brought back and reported to us at a later date anyway, right?
I believe that either myself or Mr. Phelan would bring back information on those items.
Of course, thanks. That's all, Mr. Mayor.
Any further questions for Mr. Gossett on that?
Mayor, and maybe
Mr. Bean.
Maybe this one can wait. 8.1 and 8.3 kind of work together, I guess, is what I'm trying to see. And that chart of the infrastructure and waived conditions. So 8.1 or 8.1 says the subject to section 8.3, the following conditions. precedent to the construction of the city infrastructure, just the very, and that lists all of those. 8.3 then waives what we just did in 8.1. Is that right?
And that's precisely what I was talking about, Councilmember Veen, is that I was expecting to get a listing of those type of conditions so we could make a decision as to whether what they were asking us to do would be something that we would waive those conditions on. And so what we'll do is we'll change that section 8.3 and it'll essentially read that to the extent that they're asking us to waive an item before all the conditions are satisfied, we'd come back to the city council for your approval on that particular item.
Okay, and a couple things, because we don't know what those waivers are, so we're going to agree to the agreement without knowing specifically what those items are.
You're not agreeing to any waivers until you know what those infrastructure items are in advance. So what we would do is we'd come to you and say, this is the infrastructure that they're asking the city to perform before all these conditions are satisfied. Would you be willing to waive all of the conditions that are set forth in section 8.1?
So we'll handle that in a separate vote at a separate time.
Correct.
That's basically what we're saying. So right now, there aren't any, and then they would come back with that list at a later time.
Correct, and it's just, I think it's a function of timing that we just didn't get that listing, and so it seemed to me the better course of action is to modify it and come back to the council with those specific line items.
And Mayor Bochansky, I think that will actually work better because we are currently and hopefully in the future working on some of the particulars, and so we'll know more. Time and study and due diligence will provide us further information, so we'll be able to brief what are the requests for waivers in advance, and if we put them out there now, we'd end up bringing them back to you because they would have probably been modified over the next few months as we review those.
Thank you. I just want to take a moment, if there's no other questions, at least on that item for now. Mr. Schuterash, would you be willing to introduce yourself and your team that you got with you? Just give us your names and titles and introduce yourself, please.
Hello, Eric Schuterash, COO of Fufeng USA. I have Jack Powell, who's the president of Fufeng USA. I'm not sure if you can see him on the screen or not, and he's with Kevin Zhao, analyst of ours. And then we have Bill Rock, who is our commercial director, and Mary Armstrong, who's our HR director. And we apologize we weren't able to make it in today in person. We tried for the last 2 days, but weather didn't permit it. So sorry, we're calling it remote.
All right, thank you. And if we have any specific questions at council, you could at least give us some insight. Is that what we're understanding? Mr. Schuterash?
Correct. Yep, correct.
Okay. And is Cheryl back there? Cheryl, can you increase, is the volume maxed out here in the, all right, well, we need to get upgrades probably this system too, but put it on the list. I know I've got a few questions, a few items I think that it's worth going back over, but I wanted to open up to council first. Let me know when I can start, but I'd start, we've got council, any questions that you guys want to ask or concerns or comments, I'd open up to that, and then I've got a list here I'd like to mention off as well. So I'll open that to council at this point. Or do you guys want me to start with my list?
Well,
Mr. Veen, please go ahead.
Just procedurally, I was anxious to hear everybody before we make comments, so we can either make them before or after. Is that right?
Yeah, I guess I've got some questions I'd like to answer, or to ask first. I think a few things that we can go over that have been there before, but I think it's important to re-go over, and there may be some new information. So I guess I'd like to start with that, and then we can go to if you'd like then to go to public comment, we'll go from there. I don't know, is Keith Lund available? I got a list here. The first one's probably for you. You could step up. And actually for the company as well. But just, there's been a lot of talk about the ownership structure of the company. Can you give us some insights on what exactly that looks like, especially with from an institutional perspective as well?
Absolutely. Mayor Brzezinski, members of the council, Keith Lund, Grand Forks Region Economic Development Corporation. There's a visual that could be projected. We talked last week, so I appreciate the opportunity to address the council with this matter. We've mentioned that the company is listed on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. We also mentioned the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission has supervisory relationship over that stock exchange. Here we have an ownership structure, and just wanted to point out that, right around a third or maybe just a little bit more of the company is owned by institutional investors that many of us would recognize with investment portfolios. Really the largest one of that is a European firm, Treetop, a little over 18%. You have Vanguard, Fidelity, and a number of other European and domestic firms. So, obviously the investment is coming from China, but there is a lot of investment, domestic and European, a lot of oversight over these organizations, and, for myself and for others gives some comfort in terms of that ownership structure. So I think it's a good sign. I think that these folks investing have demonstrated a confidence in the company as well.
Can you explain the difference? I know we've got a company that's already in town that's been, I think a good contributor to the town, but explain the difference of Cirrus Aircraft versus this company as far as the ownership structure.
In terms of the ownership, absolutely. So Cirrus Aircraft had a real tough time in the economic downturn in 2008 and ultimately went through an ownership change. That company was purchased by a company in China called Kaega. And so they're a sole ownership, and they have some representation in their headquarters in Duluth. Again, so maybe just backing up, tremendous corporate citizen, and Mr. King, who we got to know real well, has been really part of the community. Spoke with him today, not about this, but another matter that I hope to bring forward here in the next couple of months. But nevertheless, they owned by Kaega. The ownership of Kaega is another company that is really owned by the People's Republic. So, I mean, the company is owned ultimately through that ownership structure of that. There's been, no discussion of any impropriety with regard to that ownership interest. That did happen over a decade ago, but it has continued to be business operation as usual. So there is a Chinese ownership in Grand Forks, as there is, across the state of North Dakota and across the United States. Mayor, I hope that answers your question.
Well, thank you. Do you have the mouse there? I don't know if someone can close. There's a file that's open to the upper left there. I don't know if it shows up on your screen or Cheryl's got that.
Close that out.
There you go.
Oh, very good.
Oh, perfect.
And in comparison, I'm sorry, Mayor, I only answered half of your question. Fufeng Group is, as I mentioned, publicly traded on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, and they are a wholly owned subsidiary of Fufeng USA, which is developing the project in the United States. So it has institutional investment and publicly traded. So the ownership structures are really quite different. And both of the investments are coming from overseas, from China, but the structure is actually different. And I hope, Mayor, that answers your question.
Oh, that's helpful. Do you know what the government pension fund is? It says Government Pension Fund Global. Do you have any insight on what that one is?
Yeah, that's a Norwegian fund.
Okay, so the Norwegian pension fund has ownership.
That's right.
All right, anybody got any, I guess since Keith's up, if anyone's got questions for him. All right, actually this next one I got, and maybe this is good for you, Eric, you probably, Mr. Shooter-Ash and your team, you probably thought of the same thing as you took positions within the company, but if we can get them back up on the screen, Cheryl, that'd be great. As far as you know, is that institutional ownership correct? And is there any, I guess before you took the job, I imagine you thought of some of the same questions. Is this owned by the Chinese government? Can you give us any insights on that front, Mr. Shooter-Ash?
Yeah, Mayor, the structure that Keith showed is, is correct. And, and like I think we've discussed is, and probably a lot of my team, before joining the company, did our, own research as well. And, I would say, found the same thing, as that was part of my decision, joining the company. And, now being a part of it for 2 years, now I have, I would say, intimate knowledge of the structure as we've, incorporated the company in the U.S. and set up commercial banking, and have, found all that to be completely accurate.
All right, thank you. I guess the clear part there is there Chinese government ownership in the company that you're aware of?
No.
Okay, and the next question might go to you, or probably to you as well. As you guys look at the build out here, I guess there's two questions, and maybe Mary can answer the second one, but as you're looking at the build out, are you looking at U.S. firms to do the build out? Have you looked at local firms for the construction and the contracting side? Where are you at on that front?
Yeah, the construction will be done with a U.S. firm. We've spent kind of the better part of, I would say, January, starting to talk to general contractors with a focus on the ones located in the local area. So that's our intention. We're evaluating the different companies and who has what for kind of local manpower and experience, and but still putting that plan together on exactly how we'll go forward with the build.
Sounds good. And Mary, as you're doing the hiring, obviously hiring is difficult all through the country right now, but the intention is to hire as many locals and as many Americans as you can at the plant, all the way up to the plant manager. Is that correct?
That's correct, exactly. So when for the hiring process, we would be looking for local hiring as well.
Sounds good. And as far as I guess this will be back to you, Eric. When this plant, I know that the engineering team has looked at it quite a bit, but as you come forward with the build design and looking at it, that's going to be in concert with the engineering department with the city, and then the entire construction process, anything that gets built there, the city inspections team will be having to inspect it all along the way and approving the plans and be intimately involved. Is that what your understanding is?
Yeah, correct. I mean, we've already been engaging with the city on a site plan. We just had 3.5-hour meeting today with on wastewater treatment, among other things. But and we've started some of the air permitting work as well. So our intention, I wouldn't even say it's intention. I mean, it's mandatory. We have to get the required permits, and we'll be doing that through the engineering design, prior to startup.
All right, thank you. Well, and I know you guys will be hanging around, so thank you. If we have some more questions, we'll get back to you. The next couple questions I got are probably for you, Todd. And actually, maybe, Eric might be able to answer this one too. Mr. Spicer had said that the plant only needs 40 acres. Do you have a chart of the plant? It seems that the insinuation was that they're purchasing more acres than would be needed. I know for, that product expansion and other things in the future, possibly other partnerships with other companies. But what is the site? I mean, we've got some initial site plans. Is the site intended to only be 40 acres, or is it going to be larger than that, looking at the site, Todd? Or why don't you start with you? Do you have the graphic there?
Mayor Bochansky, and we didn't get to this last week, but it's attached as part of the PowerPoint. If you can show that, Cheryl, on the screen. So you can see the initial concept site plan that will get more developed, but you can see where the 370-acre site of which we speak of. And if you look at the initial site, which is in the square, which is about 2/3 of the site. If you look in particular on the site itself, right here, if you look at the rail that is going to come in, the area, this is going to be the storm pond, and where the wastewater lift station will be. Will connect down here to our wastewater system. This is the wastewater pretreatment system that's required with industries like the Fufeng wet corn mill, and we'll take it from the pump station to our forest main and out. But you can see other than the storm pond and pump station, the pretreatment, the rail is really the northern part of the initial build of the site, and then everything to the south is intended to be built out as part of the initial construction. The areas further north are future expansion areas, and so you can see essentially at least half of the site will be built out as part of the initial construction of the facility.
All right, thank you, Todd. Any other questions for council on that item? Yeah, please, Ms. Mock.
Todd, do you know who's purchasing the northern part of that?
Yep.
Or is that part of this purchase as well?
It's all part of the one purchase. Mr. Shuderash, he can speak. I think there's a handful of property owners that they negotiated with, and I'd leave that up to Eric about the different parties that have been involved in this land purchase.
And if there's any plan for that? Do we know if there's a plan?
Yeah,
for
I think
that
that's
other
all
portion?
future expansion. This first initial development has been described as a $700 million investment, and as part of this initial investment.
So that subsequent investment would come later with following expansions, is that the plan?
With following expansions, you are correct.
Any other questions on that? I guess one, maybe you can probably get this, odor's been a big thing. I think there's a lot of concerns about odor. Looking at that, these lagoons here, is that, and I guess a lot of the structures, how much of the structure is indoors? Are there going to be outdoor lagoons, or what do you expect on that as far as your knowledge on the engineering side of it, Todd?
Sure. Mayor Paczynski, members of the City Council. Number one, as we know from today, we're in a cold weather environment, so most wastewater facilities in our area of the country are indoor, and so you can anticipate areas of concern that you would have for odors are the pretreatment system, where they're going to treat the wastewater that's going to come to the city of Grand Forks, so it's within domestic limits for us to treat. So these areas are going to be covered. The other areas, as part of our initial review, and we're going to have a task force that's going to specifically look at odor. But if you look at other areas that we're going to focus on, our consultant Black & Veatch has a work plan of looking at the odor issue in particular. Number one, the wastewater pretreatment system is covered. When we went to other facilities, for example, in Blair, Nebraska, that was essentially kind of a Cargill owned and at least operated agribusiness park. They had open-aired pretreatment system, and obviously they're further south than we are here in Grand Forks, but theirs is going to be covered. There's some other facilities on here that when we've initially spoken with Fufeng representatives, also spoken with Black & Veatch, they're going to have areas that are going to be creating the product. They're going to be inside facilities, and so they're not going to be out, they're not going to be to the air, and even those containers that are covered are going to be within buildings themselves too. So it'll be well maintained, and again, the important part of what we're doing here is part of the site plan review, as part of how we're going to engage the company. They've been very transparent, and our consultants, whether it's Black & Veatch and other industrial consultants that we have hired, are going to be able to review those plans in advance.
Any other questions? Yeah, Mr. Weber, please.
Just to kind of reiterate or emphasize that, when we were in Blair and Fort Dodge in Nebraska and Iowa, there was discussion about odor. The only strong feelings about really foul odor came from those open air lagoons. We will have none of those in the plant here.
Yeah, I think the odors we've talked about are the a warmed up corn, like it smells like a corn flake. But the truth is, our existing facilities do have upsets. J.R. Simplot, most of the year it functions well. When they do have upsets, it's generally they have an anaerobic digestion system, and if there's some sort of disrepair of that system, there might be some wastewater type odors that need to get corrected, and they get corrected. So in a similar vein, they're going to function very well most of the time, and they're going to have, if there's an upset, it's likely in that pretreatment system that we're going to be well aware of, because we're part of that end user of that treatment of the wastewater.
So there were two kinds of odor. There was the corn smell, and then there was the waste smell. I don't remember any argument about the corn smell. There seemed to be no complaint about that. The complaint was about the waste smell, and again, this design seems to take care of that. Thanks.
All right. Mr. Veen, please.
Todd, it looks like in essence about half the site would be developed now and the rest half would come later. When future development does come, will there be another development agreement at that time, or will the current one have to be revised somehow? How would that transpire for the future?
Mayor Paczynski and Councilmember Veen, I think there will have to be an additional development agreement because it'll be a different, it perhaps is a kind of maybe a similar facility, it could be a different facility, agribusiness related, but it might be a different product line. And I would think at that point, we'd want to be further discussing that expansion. And with the amount of land available, it's probably a similar type of investment that would occur from a monetary and from a land expansion. So I think, Mr. Bean, we'd be back here discussing as an additional development agreement. And I suspect there'd be, additional ways that we need to support it from an infrastructure and also from perhaps even a tax incentive perspective.
And Todd, with that pretreatment, are there solids that have to be hauled out and removed?
They are. That's one of the meetings we had. Mr. Schuterash mentioned our 3.5-hour meeting on wastewater treatment. So there'll be some, they're going to have an RO system, so they are going to have some solids in that system that we're going to have to look at. So those are some of the particulars we're working at right now, whether those can be discharged directly into the Red River or will we have to bring them into our wastewater treatment plant, what the solids accumulations will be. But that's some of the mass balance stuff we're working on right now, and how best to treat those, whether it's with Fufeng alone, whether it's combined with JR Simplot and others, whether we do it at our wastewater treatment facility or should we do them nearer the site here that we're working on. Those are some of the task orders that are in the wastewater master planning that we started talking about today.
And would you say, I think Mr. Goss said this agreement is the starting point. It sounds like there's a lot of other issues yet to be negotiated as it proceeds. And would most of them come back to the city council for approval?
Mayor Bachensky and Councilmember Vina, I think the areas of infrastructure that we're going to have to bid, we're going to have design agreements on our offsite infrastructure. We're going to have to publicly bid those items. So both of those are going to come back to City Council for review and approval. Some of the permitting things we do administratively, either with ourselves or administratively with the state of North Dakota in the various agencies. Generally, you don't see those permits. For example, we approve industrial pretreatment permits for entities like a Fufeng to deliver wastewater to us. We set the parameters of strength, whether it's BOD or total suspended solids, the average day flow, the max day flow. We set those administratively. You generally don't see those industrial pretreatment permits. We administer those administratively. But all the infrastructure pieces are going to have to be bid. They're going to be designed. You're going to see those as we move forward.
Yeah, those will be the normal ones.
I think the big one is probably the first one out. And what we've heard a lot about is the planning and zoning piece. Obviously, that goes through planning and zoning. It goes to the city council. Oftentimes, it goes through twice. That's going to be a big one because we know there's a lot of adjacent property owners that are interested in that. And I think on that one, that's going to be one of our first permitted moving forward. And those are obviously public meetings. And so those are both planning and zoning and city council approvals. And just on that vein, while I'm talking about that, we are working on, what the annexation looks like in that area. We are looking at what the taxation would be for not only the Fufeng site, but if you move forward with the adjacent properties, what their property tax impacts will be, what the special assessment impacts might be, what the city's cost share may be on all those various issues. So we're working on all those particulars. We are intending in the next week or so, once we have all that information, to share that with you as City Council, to share it with the property owners, and then to follow up with meetings so that we can go through all those particulars. So even before it goes to Planning and Zoning and City Council, everyone will have at least had an initial discussion on those things. So we're working on those right now. That's why, in part, we've asked the Planning and Zoning, they're going to have a meeting in the first week in March here to move that meeting for the Fufeng project and the adjacent property owners move that back to the middle of March. I think we picked March 16th because that'll give us some time to get that information out in advance so that we have some dialogue before it even goes to planning and zoning.
And Todd, I think I looked at a little.
Ken, do you got your mic on? Do you want to make sure that's on?
Todd, with the industrial pretreatment program, I know that can change over time, right? Those regulations will. And so no matter who it is, everybody will comply to that same regulation. I know it doesn't sound like phosphate night right now is regulated, but it's probably coming. And when that time comes, that would be a part of this?
It would be. Right now, phosphorus is not regulated by the state of North Dakota, but it could come in the future, and then we'd have to meet that requirement. You know, whether we require industries like JR Simplot to do something with their pretreatment, or we add something at our wastewater treatment plant itself. So those are always adaptable. We issue the industrial pretreatment permits. We're reviewed by the North Dakota Department of Environmental Quality as our oversight agency.
Yeah, Mr. Weber, please.
If I could follow up on some of that. There are so many different aspects of this, and we've heard a lot about many of them several times, but I'm guessing we've heard about this before, but I don't recall the solid waste removal. I'm guessing that we have parallel situations already occurring in the community. Can you give me some sense of what solid waste removal looks like at other operations in town?
And so when I talk about solid waste, I think what Mr. Bean was talking, he was talking about from the wastewater, there's solids that are removed. So we're going to do in a similar vein with, you know, obviously American Crystal Sugar on the east side of the community. We have it with JR Simplot with potatoes. And so there's always a solids that are removed from the process. And right now what we're really working on as part of the solids removal, how can we create separate lines so that we don't have to have all these solids. I get into some of the details of our meeting here. So then we have to treat all those solids going through our wastewater treatment plant. So we're looking at a variety of ways with, whether it's with JR Simplot or with Fufeng. One is corn, one is potatoes. How can we remove those solids near that site and not mix it with all the wastewater and then try to treat it at our wastewater. So that's part of the master planning that we're working on right now, trying to find the best way that we do it. That we do really have that hub of agribusiness in that area. We anticipate once Fufeng is in there with their wet corn mill, there will be additional agribusiness that will come into that area that will just expand what we already have in our community. So we're working on the best way to do it. Thankfully, we own and operate a solid waste landfill. There'll be solid waste that will have to come to, and we do have we received a new 10-year permit renewal. There's items that you can solid waste landfill, and we do have large agribusiness that we are able to landfill as part of our agribusiness community. But when there's special waste, we'll have to review those and get those approved at North Dakota Department of Environmental Quality too.
I don't expect this to be answered tonight unless you have the answer, but would there be methane studies regarding the solid waste in our landfill? Would there be opportunities for a compost or some other kind of another use for those?
Yeah, Mayor Buczynski and Councilmember Weber. We do compost, which generally with, organics like, grass and those sorts of things. You can mix in agribusiness waste like potato waste and those sorts of things. You got to manage it well. We do have methane recovery at our landfill. There'll be air permitting through the North Dakota Department of Environmental Quality. So one of the things that Mr. Schuterash talked about is that they started the air permitting process. That's through the state of North Dakota. That's going to inform a lot of the site plan of where particular facilities are going to go. With the air permitting, it's going to help with the odors. It's going to help with plumes, all that stuff. So it's really important that they've started down that road of doing that, because that air permit and its initial studies along the way are going to really inform other things that we're going to work on along the way.
Thanks. And just one last thing then. As I mentioned, there's so many different parts to this. It's a very complex situation. The development agreement does not include consideration of property taxes or specials. That will be coming to us as a separate proposal. And will that go through planning and zoning, or does that just go through council?
It'll go to both Mayor Buczynski and Councilmember Weber. So it'll obviously start at planning and zoning. They provide a recommendation. Likely, many of these items that go through planning, you're going to see them twice. There are going to be public hearings on second reading of issues. And under this one, we really want to take a special care, because we know there's some angst about, the annexation part, the potential property tax for adjacent property owners. We have to work with Fufeng on this, whether they should be brought in as part of the annexation. How are we going to plan to serve them, whether it's with water, wastewater, stormwater. those sorts of items. We are working with the rural water system in the area, Agassiz Rural Water, and so we're working with them on how we're proposing to provide fire protection, potable water service, and how can we integrate our two systems. So there's a lot of details we're working on, and I know people are eager and anxious so we're working in this next week to really work out a lot of those details. And again, we are trying to make this a reasonable, value-added proposition in serving this, not only Fufeng, but the broader area.
Very good.
Again, the annexation will be a city council ultimate decision.
And Planning and Zoning will have the first review, make the first recommendations, including Mr. Matichak will have a chance to weigh in on that as well.
He will.
Thank you, Mr. Phelan.
Mr. Phelan, on the annexation side, with that starting in at the Planning and Zoning Committee level, I know there's properties along 81 that are anxious to see what their specials, what that's going to look like. Can we ensure that we get some, enough time so that they can review those and have some comment and some conversations leading up to that? I mean, I think, at least a week's time, or at least a fair bit of time before that first planning and zoning meeting would be helpful. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, Mayor Buczynski, that's really important. And I know Mayor Buczynski has said that. Councilmember Dockler has talked to me about it. Council President Sandy has talked to me about it. So we really want to do that. And more importantly, the mayor and the city council president want to be able to join some of those meetings so that we can talk about it firsthand. We need to get our leaders, our policymaker leaders, the information first, so before we go out and talk that we are all aligned, certainly not final approval, but we're aligned in what we're doing. And so, again, the Fufeng, as part of the development agreement, they've agreed to be annexed into the city of Grand Forks. As part of the development agreement, we're going to try to serve Fufeng with all that support infrastructure. Along the way, there's this red area where we're looking at being able to serve them with all the remaining water-related infrastructure items. We're going to have transportation infrastructure items. And so that's a separate matter from the Fufeng. As part of this development agreement, they've agreed to be annexed into the city, pay all the taxes. As part of this agreement, you have agreed as part of the pilot, 90% on the first 10 years, 75% the second 10 years are the two exemptions. That's embedded in the development agreement. And I suspect Mayor Buczynski has talked about, even with these adjacent property owners, there's ways that we can take a look at the annexation. How soon will it come in? The infrastructure components. How soon will those start? What are the city's cost share? All those things that we're working on so that we can be fair and reasonable and allow you as policymakers to review what we've done and to make decision-making better once it gets to you.
Yeah, Mr. Weber, I guess I'd just like to say I think we've got a good example of that with the Oscarville project and having something you're going in later, finding a good cost share, but I also like the idea of delaying, some of that to a date certain, especially on the specialty, so not everything's coming in at once, but also having a cost share that makes sense so that, long run, that you can look at this as a benefit. But I guess that'd just be my recommendation, and we can look at that as part of those meetings. Mr. Weber, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The drawing that's on the screen right now, can you give me a sense of how that connects to or relates to the extraterritorial zone there? Where is the ET zone in relation to this?
Mayor Buczynski and Councilmember Weber, right now we have a 2-mile ET. We do have, it's basically our 2-mile ET starts where we have annexation. So in Grand Forks, our northernmost annexation this is Oscarville in this area. This is Mill Road going north. We have these parcels annexed. And then as far as this is 27th Avenue North, we've annexed to this point. So essentially that would be our northernmost route. The city's ET goes out about 2 miles from there. We have not, as we've annexed over the last several years, when we have annexed property, we have not extended our annexation 2 miles from that area. Again, that's a city council decision. Once we set that 2-mile boundary around the city, despite the annexations that we've done over the last several years, we have not expanded that 2-mile jurisdiction. I think the other important note as we go north, similar to the south, to the north is the diversion. And so really the city it's going to be a challenge for the city to serve north of that diversion. And so it would take a lot of infrastructure. it would take additional flood protection. So you should see this line right here to the north as our northernmost area that we're going to bring into the city in a reasonable way. On the south end, that's Merrifield Road. If you go to Merrifield Road, that's kind of our southern boundary of where we can really serve properties in a reasonable way. Otherwise, we have flood protection, we have all those other issues that are challenging for us.
Thanks, that's very helpful. Thank you, Mr. Fielder.
Thank you. Any other questions? Oh, yeah, Mr. Veen.
I was just going to comment. I know you made the comment about the policies that would be for special assessing and whatever we would do along that corridor on North Washington. It's almost like creating almost a new development agreement with those others that we can acknowledge, you know, what the policies we could have for the long term for them, so that that's written and agreed to in advance and not have to change in the future.
Yeah, I think we've got a good example to serve us well for that, but I think, yeah, I like the sounds of that, so appreciate that, Mr. Veen. All right, we got any further questions on that? I'd like to talk water. I know we've looked at this a lot of different ways. I know Mr. Gaddy had a presentation on that, and I know there's been some concern. I think there's been a good indication that in normal times, even in poor times, in the 95th percentile, there's more than enough water. We're obviously really pushing hard on the Red River Valley water supply for those extreme drought times. Even in the 99th percentile, there's still enough water. I know the comment has been made. Ms. Spicer asked if anyone's called Canada. Can you, I guess, enlighten us on if you're using water that's currently permitted to the city of Grand Forks, would that create a contact to a foreign country north of us, I guess would be a question. But if you could kind of go through the whole thing, if you want to start with that one, because that was a concern that was brought up by Ms. Spicer, and then give us the rest of the water.
Yep, and I'll quickly go over this. Mr. Gaddy did a really nice job going over this. So again, as part of this presentation, Fufeng's average day, again, we're gonna draw the water from the Red River, from our Red River permit. That's 6.6 million gallons per day on average. Our historic last 20 years is 7.6 million gallons per day. I think probably closer to 95% of our average day comes from the Red Lake River. So when on an average day, whether it's summer or whether it's the winter, we're drawing 95% of our water from the Red Lake River, 5% from the Red River, Red Lake 95, Red River 5, and we blend the two rivers. And so it reduces our chemical costs. And so the more Red River we mix with the Red Lake River, the more chemicals that we need to treat our water. So that's a nice blend for us if we can maintain. Again, we talked, Mayor, you talked about this. We have a 14.2 MGD, and then we looked at the 95th percentile and the 99th percentile. And you can see at really high percentiles, Grand Forks is in a better spot than our neighbors to the south from a water supply. We have a lot more tributaries that come into Grand Forks, and obviously the major one is the Red Lake River. We're in two different water basins with the Red Lake River versus the Red River. That's to our advantage. During flooding, it's sometimes to our disadvantage. And so on the point we were trying to make on this, and the mayor, Councilmember Vian and I, we've been involved in the Red River Valley Water Supply Project. The Red River Valley Water Supply Project is really for, number one, it's a really important insurance policy for really bad droughts like we have seen before in the previous century in the 1930s, and it really protects us. We're better off than our neighbors to the south. However, with growth in industry and population, the Red River Valley Water Supply Project is really a 100-year project that we want to be part of, because we know in the next 100 years we're going to have challenges with water. We want to have that backup water supply. So again, we looked at this supply, and then we looked at our Red River permit of 30 million gallons per day. The Red Lake is at 9.4, so we've got about 40 MGD available to us. Because we're using such a small amount of our Red River permit, the 6.6 million gallons per day is well within our existing Red River permit. knowing that we're only using 5% of an average day of 7 million gallons per day. So we're really using a small portion of the Red River. The Red River is really important for us because it is the distribution point for the Red River Valley water supply. The water's going to come from the Missouri River, it's going to cross the divide, it's going to get into the Cheyenne River system and eventually make it up its way north to the Red River. We're the one entity that has an intake on the Red River, so Grand Forks is really important, not only for Grand Forks, but the greater region to distribute that water, and the Red River is an important river for us as part of the Red River Valley Water Supply Project. We also talked about Lake Ashtabula and where we have a backup water supply. Our policymakers that came before us, we were the first to buy into Lake Ashtabula, which is in and around Valley City, and so we have the highest permitted values on that lake. It was built in the 1960s. We've never called on water for Lake Ashtabula. Fargo came pretty close last summer to call on it. We're going to do it more as an exercise to see how it works with the Corps of Engineers to release some of the water into the Red River. We've never called upon it, but again, you should know this is another insurance policy we have in advance of the Red River Valley Water Supply Project that's going to come our way. Again, in our nomination is 16.8 MGD to the Red River Valley Water Supply Project. So that project is not about today, but we know something's going to happen in the next 100 years. Let's have that water supply available, and let's do it while the state of North Dakota wants to support the project, not only for the Fargo region, but the greater Grand Forks region.
Thank you. Yeah, Vice President Mock, please.
So along that point, on page 30 of the development agreement, under 8.1.3, one of the items, item G, is water supply. So I thought in previous meetings we had talked about getting an additional water appropriations permit, and then it does say that a water supply between city and state is noted in the development agreement, so we're not seeking an additional permit, we're just planning to do this with our current water allocations.
Council Member, Council Vice President Mock, we have multiple permits. We do have some industrial permits on the Red River too, from the State Water Commission. Okay. We have our existing 30 MGD permit. As we've discussed with the State Water Commission and the North Dakota Department of Water Resources, we're planning to use our existing 30 MGD permit as the permit in this case. We do have multiple other permits that we could use, but we think that's probably the best permit for us to use in this case.
So do we just have it included in here to coordinate between the city, and if something would change, to change them to like an industrial permit? Is that why we have it noted in the agreement?
We did, yep.
Okay.
Just because they have multiple permits, we just included all of the plethora of permits that we have on the Red River.
Okay.
Mr. Bean, anything further on water, at least for now?
Yeah, I would.
Please, and I will say one thing. I think that the Red River Valley Water Supply Project is crucially important. It's an insurance policy, and I will continue to fight for it. And I think the more industry you add, even the more important it becomes. But I think it's a very important project that started but needs to continue to be funded. So I'll say that just for you, Mr. Bean.
Okay, well, that's great, because I didn't come here to have an argument with Todd in front of this group today. I'm more than willing to do that, but I'm really not going to. I really want to make sure we have that commitment to the project, because it is drastically needed for us. It is an insurance policy. You know, in 2012, we had something like the 10th flood of record, and we also went into a drought in the same year. Those things can happen. A 30-style drought is what the Red River Valley Water Supply is all about. So I'm not going to get into that argument with you. We need to do it. I want to acknowledge that. Raw water is one of the critical pieces that we've got to get together with the state, with locals, everybody, try to figure that out and do it in a reasonable timeline. I think that's the bottom line, and I think we're all in support of that.
Thank you.
And I would say, the state's going to build that natural gas pipeline from the Bakken to eastern North Dakota. That's going to bring a huge amount of natural gas, and it's going to serve communities like Rugby that don't have natural gas. But there's so much gas that's going to serve agribusiness, and we know now if natural gas is going to serve agribusiness, it's going to have a wastewater component, it's going to have a water component. And that seems to me that Red River Valley Water Supply Project is not only for an insurance policy on day-to-day living, but it may have to also serve an industrial component.
Yep, thank you.
And I think it's good to point out, I think Mr. Perkins would like this as well, but when you add a cleaner burning fuel to replace some dirtier burning fuels or coal-fired energy, you actually have a chance with that to reduce emissions and set yourself up. Would that be a correct statement, Mr. Phelan?
It's true. And,
With the natural gas, I mean, this is an aside, but just in general.
Yeah.
Certainly any electricity that comes out is largely coal-fired in the state, at least in North Dakota, currently.
You are correct.
All right. I guess,
Mayor?
moving on. So, is that someone online?
Mr. Mayor, can you hear me?
Mr. Sandy, please, if you could switch that back over so we can see them. Sorry, President Sandy, please.
Yeah, thank you. So first of all, I think it's important that we allow Ms. Mock to recuse herself from any pending vote.
Yeah, you want to do, we can do that this time, that'd be fine. You want to do that this time? So if I get, would that be a motion from you, Mr. Sandy?
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure what to motion, whether we should move to have her vote or not to vote. I just think she should be recused from the future discussion.
Yeah, why don't we operate as last, and then I think we got it figured out. So, Mr. Weber, if you remember your policy here that...
Maybe Dan, I think we have it.
Yeah, sure. Last meeting, it was a motion to permit her to vote. That's my preference, although I think the council generally has a motion to simply to recuse Ms. Mock. So I think the result is the same, President Sandy.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll move we allow Ms. Mock to vote, knowing that I'm going to vote against it.
All right, we got a motion to allow Ms. Mock with her stated concerns, and we got a second on that. Any further discussion on that? I can't imagine there'd be any. To be clear, in order to not allow her to vote would be a negative vote. So all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, same sign.
Aye.
Aye.
All right, so Ms. Mock would be recused with Mr. Sandy dissenting on that, or Mr. Sandy approving that vote and the remaining dissenting.
Thank you,
All right.
Mr. Mayor. Also, I very much appreciate all the discussion this evening. We've run the gamut of interesting and very difficult topics to talk about, and I appreciate that people are willing to open up, speak their minds, touch on things that are difficult to talk about. I know in this situation, I've had lots of conversations with people related to Chinese-owned companies, related to water availability, related to natural gas. I've talked about having bad smells in our community. I've talked about dollar value of jobs to revenue for our community to cost to our community. I think although I continue to hear from people that we're going too fast or we aren't answering questions, I think that the people that aren't happy with the Fufeng project moving forward are continuing to bring up the same issues, not that similar to how earlier today people disagreed with my point of view, saying I wasn't listening or I wasn't hearing the people that were pro-hate crime ordinance. Similarly, the same or similar context, people will say that I'm not listening or hearing them related to their disagreement with Fufeng. I think we all listen and we all try hard and try to do our best to make sound judgments and make sound decisions. I, for one, have heard and discussed everything that I need to related to this project, and I believe that we've checked all the boxes that we can until we get our studies done. We need to get the studies moving forward, and the best way to protect the city related to those studies and make sure that we're not hanging our neck out is to make sure that Fufeng is on the hook for some of the costs for those development studies. So I'm going to move approval of the development agreement along with all of the individual studies and Mr. Gosted's slight changes. And I will hope that the council will follow along and approve this project so we can learn more. And as Mr. Veen said, it's another step one moving this project forward. And if things don't work right, we have the checks and balances to make sure that we can get ourselves out of it. So, Mr. Mayor, that's my motion.
I'll second that.
All right, we've got a motion and a second, so now we'll go to further comment, and I think, it is important to point out that...
You're going to talk about Canada.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's important to point out that the development agreement is not the end of the due diligence, it's kicking off the start of the due diligence, and it sets the parameters for that. But I think we're going to continue and do some more comment here and open it up, but we do have a motion and second. Todd, I guess if you could, sorry, ma'am, what's your name?
You know my name.
Miss
Spicer.
Miss Spicer, I know, I got it, okay. So please,
Yes.
you can answer that side.
Yep.
Mr. Phelan?
Mayor Wachensky and members of City Council, we're fortunate to live in the United States and the state of North Dakota. We do have permits with the state of North Dakota, and we have permits, some with the federal government, but for the most part, all of our permits are with the state of North Dakota, whether it's a wastewater discharge permit to the Red River, whether it's a water permit to draw water from the Red River is a North Dakota permit. The permit to draw water from the Red Lake permit is a state of Minnesota permit. So those do not relate to, we certainly have partnerships with Canada, but all of our permits are with either the United States of America or the state of North Dakota, or in the state of Minnesota on the Red Lake side.
Thank you, Mr. Phelan. Vice President Mock, please.
Just a basic question. I believe as part of one of the studies, the plume analysis is included in some of the air impacts. I did notice that in the development agreement, the results of the odor were noted as a potential issue. Do we need to note anything in the development agreement that if the plume analysis came back as impacting, federal grants with the airport or something of that nature, something substantive, do we need to make note of that in the development agreement at all?
Mr. Gosted?
It certainly could be made part of it, but I believe it would be ingrained within really section 8.1.3 that talks about the developer has to obtain all required governmental requirements and all governmental requirements have been satisfied or obtained for the construction. And then you pointed out one of the, in the languages included but not limited to, which means this is not an exclusive list.
Okay.
And governmental requirements would be, is defined broadly to include policies, regulations by a governmental body that would have oversight of this particular project.
So if if something significant came back from those analyses, we would have the space within this agreement to bring it back and consider those impacts, I guess?
Yes.
Okay.
I think to that being Mayor Baczynski and Council Vice President Mock, you're likely to see something in the near future about Northern Plains nitrogen regarding the plume analysis and some of the issues we may or may not have. So that's one example where we said we're going to follow up, and ultimately we'll be back to report to the City Council on that particular project. Similar on this project, there's going to be very many report backs to you.
All right, we got any further comment from council at this point? I know I've got a couple other I was going to ask. I don't know if it's worth, or do you want me to just move on to some citizen comment, or what does council think at this time? Got one more. I think there's a couple. If you can maybe just hit them quickly, Todd. I know that at least the council knows where the costs are going, but can you break down the costs quickly? And I think there's been a lot of question on what was already in the plan for infrastructure construction. What is a primary benefit going there? What is specially assessed? If you got that breakdown, I think that's one quick thing I'd like to show, and then I got just a couple more other brief ones.
Yep. There's been a lot of discussion about the city infrastructure, and again, the $96 million, that's all going to be paid back through either Fufeng, through special assessments, rates. We're going to get some cost shares from the state and federal government that have been applied. But this really lines out what Fufeng's share of that $96.6 million is at $40 million. The 55.9, all that is in wastewater, in particular in the wastewater treatment plant. We talked about the $45 million plus that we were already going to invest in the wastewater treatment plant. We're going to, instead of taking several years to get that done, we're going to take a few years to get those improvements done. So that's the major piece of infrastructure that was already going to happen. We broke.
You're not projecting on the screen.
Oh, Cheryl, can you project on the screen, please? Cheryl, can you project on the screen?
It's what's shown on your screen there, Todd, is that correct? So Cheryl, if you can get this front screen up on the...
There we go.
There you go.
Okay, that was the first with the 96.6, and then breaking it down to the various funding approaches, we've talked about the ARPA funds from both the city and the county. We're going to apply those funds to wastewater treatment. State Water Commission cost share is going to go to the raw water supply. That's a 60% cost share. We've talked about the primary benefit escrow, infrastructure escrow. That's what Mr. Gosta talked about earlier. That's at $9.2 million of what we have estimated currently. If it's more or less than that, it'll be more or less than that. So, and that's primarily in the wastewater area, and it's in the raw water supply. So that's that escrow amount. Fufeng permit fees. Fufeng's going to pay all building permit fees. They're going to pay flood protection fees. They're going to pay sewer tapping fees, et cetera. And they're going to pay regular utility fees above and beyond the raw water and the wastewater. So we charge mosquitoes, we charge stormwater fees, et cetera, on a utility fee. They're going to pay all those regular fees as part of what they're doing. Special assessments, again, we're looking at the special assessments to the Fufeng property. At the same time, we're looking at the special assessments to the adjacent property owner so that we can let both sides know. And then state revolving loan funds. We're going to look at drinking water SRF loans. We're going to look at clean water SRF loans. We're going to look at Bank of North Dakota infrastructure loans and see what the best way. We may even mix in a revenue bond or two on the water wastewater side. We'll have to see what works best for us.
Todd, on that line, you've got a plan here, it looks like, how to do it. There may have to be some adjustments, like with the raw water. I know you're looking for 1.2 million up front, I believe, just for the design, right? We'll have to go back to the Water Commission for the construction part. Yeah. Do you feel pretty confident we'll get that on both levels?
Mayor Butensky and Councilmember Green, I am confident that we're going to get that. Again, but in the agreement, say for instance, we don't get that cost share, the agreement spells out that Fufeng has to pick up the difference then. And they've agreed to that, so we're going to do our level best to get the state cost share of 60%, but if that doesn't work out, that's one of those conditions we didn't complete, we didn't get done, but we don't have to pay that extra 60%. We're going to have to work, Fufeng's have to pick up that share.
Is that the same with the state revolving loan funds too?
Yeah, the state revolving loan fund are loans, and so we'll have to determine, whatever the financing costs are, if they're more than what we anticipate, again, Fufeng has to pay whatever that share is. Our goal and obligation is to go and work in good faith to go get those cost shares, get the best financing we can to try to move the project forward. Again, this is the breakdown of that 96.6. Again, the 9.2 on escrow, 17.9 on special assessments, $3 million we're estimating on permit and connection fees, utility rates and charges, 49.8, and that'll be that's for stormwater, wastewater, water primarily. Our water-related functions are embedded in that. The 6.4 in ARPA for the city and the county, and then the State Water Commission share, that's for the raw water supply is what we're asking for on that. That's that 10.3 million. Breaking it down again, so you look at that 96.6, we've got the 6.4 for ARPA on the bottom, 10.3 on State Water Commission share. City share is at $46 million. We're going to pay in fees primarily, again, one more time, is for the wastewater treatment plant improvements that we already had planned. And then finally, Fufeng share is 33.9. So they're going to pay a substantial amount of these infrastructures. Again, they're going to pay their fair share of the cost. These are in the development agreements that Mr. Goss said has gone over the last several meetings. There's going to be some costs that normally would be special assessed, but we're going to try to move forward, okay? As part of the agreement, because they, as Mr. Vian talked about, there might be some projects we want to move forward before the special, the district is set up. They've agreed to pay their share in advance of that. And the only thing in the agreement is that on substantial completion, they'll pay their share of special assessments. Because if we go forward with adjacent property owners, we will not have created the district. The city of Grand Forks is going to pay their share until the district is approved. So that's how we're going to move forward. But again, we got a partner that's willing to pay their share of the special assessments in advance of any district getting approved. Again, the $9.2 million in an escrow account, the $5 million of a letter of credit, that gets us to that, that around that $15 million of upfront money we've put into the agreement that to protect the finances of the city of Grand Forks is what we did. Mayor, that's kind of the long and short of the finance, and that's the importance of approving this development agreement. So as we start working on these particulars, we're protecting ourselves. And make no doubt, we've always said, this protects us against something won't happen. As we work on any project on behalf of Mayor Boczynski and the City Council and the citizens of Grand Forks, we're going to try to make this successful. We're going to try to get this done. We're going to work day and night to get it done, okay? We're not going to work in a way that will not make this happen. We're going to work to make it happen, and if there's something not right, we're going to have the courage and the responsibility to come back to you and say, we need to come back to you and let you know what we have found.
Mr. Phelan, last two on quickly. Obviously, the truck traffic has been talked about. That'll be part of the study as the development agreement, both where on the roads, but as far as the number of trucks.
We are. Well, we've got a task order. As part of this agreement, you're going to approve a small change order of $8,000, I think, but we've already moving down the road, working with the North Dakota DOT with our consultant, looking at all the various, city, state highways, interstates, and what its impacts may be. So that study's already moving forward. The preliminary look, when I talked to the project manager, he didn't see any showstoppers as part of the traffic, whether it's rail or trucks or roads. But the study's not done, but there was nothing that really, as part of the initial numbers that we've seen, that were out of the ordinary.
I did hear, I know we all get sick of the trains, even west of town, but on 42nd as well, and we're obviously still pushing with the legislator to get funding on that underpass there, but I did hear, and if you could I guess, talk on the trains, that there's not going to be additional trains. There would just be potentially BNSF doesn't change their schedule. It'll be the same number of trains, but there'd be the potential to have more cars on the train. Is that a fair assessment of how you heard it as well?
Mayor Boczynski, yeah, that's what I have heard, that the trains are going to go north through the area as they head north, and there's going to be more cars now. There's more customers. Fufeng's an important customer now of BNSF. And so there's going to be longer trains with more cars on, but not more trains, is how it's set up at this point in time. Again, more details to come with the traffic study, and as part of the detailed development plan.
All right, thank you, Mr. Phelan. That's the questions I got for now. Council, any further questions, or we can open up to comment? All right, if there's some people that have the same information, if you're going to tell the same story, just you can feel free to come up and say, I'm against it, I'm opposed to this, and state your name. I think that's great. If it's the same thing repeated over again, they have heard, they've taken into account of that, the council. Please consider that. I know, Mr. Workup, you're on here for annexation. Was that the particular item you wanted to talk? Did you want to discuss that, or are you okay waiting until there's more details and at the next meeting? Okay. So why don't you go first then, Mr. Workup?
Thank you, Mayor Boczynski. My name is John Workup, 1310 Count Circle, Grand Forks. I'm here today on behalf of S&S Transport, Brian Seng, Signature Warehousing, and Seng Holdings. They own property generally to the east of the proposed project. You might be familiar with S&S Transport name as they've been providing trucking services with their headquarters in Grand Forks for decades. They've provided millions of dollars of economic benefit to the area. S&S has been seeking to develop portions of its property since 2021. Projects that have been proposed have included warehouses, a truck shop, and a truck wash. The efforts to attain approval for the site plans, building permits, have always been met with the statement from the city that no approval of any development unless you annex the property to the city. The S&S properties are already served by rural water. They already have an existing sanitary system. And any plan for development included all necessary infrastructure on site. From the property owner's view, there wasn't any benefit to annexing to the city. Nevertheless, the city staff would not move forward with approval or even review of the development unless annexation was agreed to. My clients were aware that annexation brings higher taxes and a flood protection assessment as a given, but there's also additional possibility of additional special assessments if projects such as sewer, water, lights, or streets are constructed. My clients didn't seek any assistance such as tax breaks, monetary assistance, or any other assistance from the city. They simply wanted to build. My clients wanted to know what the cost of annexation would be. What would the taxes turn out to be? What special assessments would be imposed? To date, they still haven't got an answer. The truck shop that my clients had proposed never happened in Grand Forks. To be clear, the truck shop happened, but it didn't happen here. It happened in another state. It wasn't that the other location provided assistance. They just provided answers to the client's development questions. While my client knew that the annexation back in 2021 would come with costs, the corn milling plant that's proposed adds yet another layer of costs to my client. It's a cost for my client's existing improvements because special assessments will occur. It's a cost to my client's undeveloped land, even if it hasn't been improved because of special assessments and additional taxes. And it's a cost to any future development that my client might want to do on the portions of its land which is undeveloped. These costs are completely unknown to my client and are completely beyond my client's control. These costs are also unknown to you. Mr. Phelan commented that, and there have been questions from this council. What are the costs of this? Well, we don't know. Maybe next week, maybe next month, we'll find out those costs. But we'll go ahead with this today. We'll find out later what's going to happen to the neighbors. These costs are yet another layer of impediment not only to the future development by my client, but also their continued operation in Grand Forks. My client has asked specifically, what are the special assessment costs that are going to happen to his property if this corn milling plant goes through? He's not provided an answer. There is no answer at this point. All we know that my client is going to bear the brunt of project costs, but is not a part and is not afforded a seat at the table for negotiation. These things happen to him, not with him, not for him, to him. A question I think that should be important before you go forward is, have special assessment districts, or at least drafts thereof, been presented to you? No, they've not. The council at this point does not know what property is going to be annexed in addition to the corn milling plant. Another question would be, what is the cost and the type of special assessments will be levied upon the neighboring property owners? Will they be limited in some fashion? If you say you can't limit the special assessments, I would refer you to Section 4 of the development agreement, where the city agrees to limit the special assessments on the corn milling plant. You've made an agreement, you won't special assess them for the full costs. But there are no similar protections granted in that development agreement for the neighboring property owners. While protection exists for no protection exists for the neighboring property owners against special assessments, What protection exists for neighboring property owners against special assessments for infrastructure costs if this project doesn't go through? We're talking about many millions of dollars worth of costs that are going forward, but I would refer you to sections 8.5 and 9.4 of your development agreement, which are the reimbursement provisions of the development agreement. Things that don't get reimbursed by the project if the development doesn't go through include special assessments, things that could be special assessed. They don't get paid back to the city. So if the project doesn't go through, the special assessments for the various pieces of infrastructure may still go through. They'll get special assessed to my client. My client didn't need them, but they get to pay for them. My client would bear the risk of the project not going through. I think another important question is what area will be annexed in addition to the property upon which the project will be built. I think the question has been told, the answer has been told to you today, you don't know. We don't know. Figure that out later. I know that no annexation map has been presented to you. And has there been any information presented to you other than a drawing with some hatches on it about who's going to be affected by the project, annexed and assessed for the improvements which don't benefit them? The property owners in this area already have sewer and water. They have rural water, but they've got the infrastructure that they need to operate their business. And they've had that infrastructure for decades.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor?
Yeah.
Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Workup. I thoroughly appreciate the commentary and the lecture. I think this probably is warranted for counsel from apparently Mr. Workup as counsel for SNS directly to counsel for the city. I'm not sure how this is relevant at this minute without a public hearing.
Yeah, Dana, we're having trouble hearing you. If Cheryl can turn the volume up on that, I think it's clicked down there. You can go all the way up max on there.
What I believe is Mr. Workup has significantly gone beyond his 3 minutes. And if he has additional comments, he should send them to city staff and the city attorney.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. I mean, I know we did answer some of that in there, and if you do, if you are willing to wrap up on it, it is, we did talk about many of these items today, and again, this is the start of the due diligence process. It's a long process. It's not the end of it. The annexation is proposed. It hasn't been set into motion. That's a separate process. You know very well that that's the case. We are certainly willing to bring them to the table. We just talked about that earlier today, and Mr. Veen talked about a separate development agreement with the owners that are there. So I think that addresses those concerns. But if you have something to wrap up, please, we do have.
I disagree that it answers the concerns, and I appreciate that after a number of people have talked, Mr. Sandy now comes with a 3-minute limit on me, but nobody else. But in any event, I will continue with my comments. I understand that that providing jobs and that you would like to provide incentives to create jobs. My client's been making jobs without incentives, tax breaks, or assistance for decades. Putting this project on the backs of existing property owners and employers will smother the existing jobs, which ask for nothing from the taxpayers in hopes of potential jobs. On the issue,
so, Mr. Workup, you're asserting that creating more jobs is bad for the economy?
I'm not stating that at all. You provide an incentive to one person. It costs, you take money from another to provide.
Okay, what person are we taking money from to give to them? And then please finish up. Hey, I know you're here. We're working on that, and I told you the annexation has been proposed and hasn't moved forward, but thank you for the comment. Mr. Workup, you do need to wrap up. I appreciate your comments, but please wrap up in the next bit here, because we've got a lot of other people here that are ticked off, according to him.
On the issue of jobs, there's not a single word in the development agreement which refers to or requires the developer to make a single job, not one. The questions I think the council should ask and answer before action: how much infrastructure is going to be specially assessed to nearby property owners? How much additional property is going to be annexed as a result of this project? These questions and the answers to them, if you proceed with the development agreement, are not conditions that you can get out of the development agreement in Section 8. There's been reference to that earlier tonight. Those aren't conditions precedent to going forward with the agreement. You're stuck with it. Those questions don't get answered. If they do, it's only by chance. And the property owners neighboring don't have any say about it. I would question, why is it necessary to move forward at this time in an expedited fashion with such limited information? Without knowing who is going to be impacted and how can the council in good conscience move forward at this time? I understand the allure of something new coming to the area, but I think it's also important to be cognizant of and protect that which you already have. My client is somebody you already have. They create jobs. They haven't asked you for or cost you anything. The development, with its costs being imposed on the nearby landowners, isn't of any benefit to them. It's a detriment. I'd ask you to please consider whether you have enough information to explain this project's impact and its costs, and if you can identify all the property owners impacted through specials or annexation before you take action. If you don't have the information, the action should be deferred until the impacts are known. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Warkup. All right, Mr. Coachman, please. Mr. Coachman, please.
Hello, City Council. Pleasure to meet you. Could you lead us through
What's that? Oh. Mr. Coachman, is this address correct?
Yes.
Can you state your address? I can't read it.
Mr. Mayor, I'm doing the earlier...
Mr. Coachman, could you state your address? I can't.
405 Barrett. And I noticed that...
what city is that in?
The other topic, you never asked anybody...
Sorry, what city is it in? The rest of them are listed on the sheet.
I am in Larimore.
Okay, thank you.
I noticed that you didn't ask anybody from the earlier topic where they lived, but that's okay.
Yeah, they've got their address listed on the sheet.
Okay. This is just a notice. Just wanted to clarify so everybody could find out what's going on. This is what is talk about a citizen's arrest by a private person. And on the second page, for what reasons? And on the third page, when a private person may arrest and must inform the person of the cause of the arrest. So this is pretty much a notification and the procedures against a person arrested without a warrant. And that's what we're falling in. And on the last page is what we like to do is with the authority of God the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, the U.S. Constitution and the North Dakota Century Code that is spelled out in 29-06-1 and a couple other. I am Michael Coachman, and we the people of Grand Forks City and the county of North Dakota hereby informing you that you are placed, you, the mayor, Brandon Brzezinski, Danny Williams, if I misspell your name or pronounce your name, sorry about that. Katie, Brett, Jennifer Mock, Kyle, Dana, Ken Veen, Todd, Phelan, Joseph Quinn, and Dan Zgodowski as citizens arrest on the following charges. Federal violation of 18 U.S.C. A 9-953-953, private correspondence with a foreign government, which nobody even on today have said, hey, look, we have got the State Department, FBI, or any other three-letter agencies to say, okay, with this company. State violation, public service refusal to perform duty, which is failing to do that federal law. Criminal conspiracy, falsification, false statements. with the following individuals we believe who are co-conspirators: Senator Hoeven, Senator Kramer, Kelly Armstrong, Doug Burgum, Lieutenant Governor Stanford, Bank of North Dakota, the Attorney General's Office of North Dakota, Commercial Department, and any other organization that provide information to said company. We, the people, demand that all requirements and funding cease with the City of Grand Forks and Fufeng Group until all charges are fully investigated and all individual members are cleared hereby. On 22nd February 2022, the year of our Lord and Savior, Michael Coachman, and we the people. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Coachman. All right, we've got
Mayor,
Bob. Oh, sorry, Ms. Stockler, you got a comment, please?
just a quick one.
Yeah.
I would like to point out for the record that I actually voted no at the last meeting, and Ms. Vice President Mock was recused from the vote because of conflict of interest.
Okay. Bob Muschitz, please.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, Mr. Todd, you know, I really, we've been asking questions, and every time we hear, if we're going to hear the same questions again, say if you're against it or if you're for it. We went through a lot of stuff tonight. Your attorney, city attorney, couldn't hear him. So who knows what he said? So if somebody asks the questions about something he said, it's because they couldn't hear him. But my whole thing is we have not gotten the answers to any questions that we've been asking. So if people get answers to questions they ask, they wouldn't have to answer them again. What Mr. Coachman just said about being vetted is kind of a laughing matter for you folks. Because you say, well, they've been recommended to come here by the state of North Dakota. This fast-tracking thing that seems to be in place, where we gotta get it going, to me, that's a huge red flag that there's corruption involved. Every other time in this whole country, when you see ramming things through the people, not listening, not answering their questions, making a mockery on the radio of the people with very, very valid concerns, Mr. Sandy, you are appalling. And I'm sorry, but I've heard you on the radio belittling fellow citizens of the United States, let alone our Grand Forks town. I'm appalled at this behavior, totally appalled. You were elected by the people. Mr. Mayor, I think you're doing a wonderful job, but you have to start to listen to the questions and answer them. Right or wrong or indifferent, if people keep asking questions that have been answered, by all means, turn off the mic, send them home. You're not going to make everybody happy, but if you answer the questions, please. That's all we are asking. That's all we're asking. So if I hear any more about, well, if we're going to hear the same old thing, say yes or no every day, when you haven't answered anybody's questions, I think they'll ask him again. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. All right, Ben, I never know how to pronounce this last name, but you're the only Ben, and it's a Polish last name, so please.
Grandzielewski.
Grandzielewski, there you go. And your writing in green wasn't very clear, but please.
Good evening. I just have some questions. We touched on water usage earlier, and you say there's going to be plenty of water. Except for last summer, I'm sure you all remember, the city was asking people to stop watering their lawns and stop using water, which I think was a very responsible thing to do. You look at the river, I've lived here my whole life, never seen the river lower before. My question is how all of a sudden, last year you were asking us to stop using water, and next year or 2 years, whenever this thing's built, we're going to be using almost twice as much water as we were using, and I guess I don't understand that. If there's that much water, how come we didn't have it last year? You know, why can we just supply this company now that they're in town and everything is honky-dory? It doesn't make much sense. And I guess secondly, I would like to say that when we're spending this kind of money, I don't understand why we can't put it to a citywide vote. That doesn't make much sense. I mean, if it were a school or something, it would be a citywide vote. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Field, I know you can touch on the water part, so please.
Yeah, Mayor Buchenski, members of the City Council, and to the gentleman. If you think about last summer, we did have a dry summer. Our concerns were the water treatment plant. Thankfully, we were into our new water treatment plant last summer, which is a 20 MGD facility. Our former facility was a 16 MGD facility, a million gallons per day facility. Last summer, we were in and around 16 million gallons per day, so we were concerned about the capacity of the water treatment plant. So to take the shave off some of the peaks of our water treatment plant, we asked people to go to mitigate some of the watering usage outdoors. It wasn't regarding the river flow past Grand Forks, but it was regarding our infrastructure and specifically our water treatment plant.
And what's different about this plant with the water usage from this plant? Is it going through the water treatment plant?
The other important part, yes. You know, one of the big things with this is if we needed to deliver potable water to this facility, for example, JR Simplot, they have a food grade product in potatoes and obviously manufacturing into various potato products. They got to have potable water that's treated. This particular facility it does not need that, so they're going to take raw water. We are going to use some of our drinking water facilities, transmission lines. We're going to build a pump station near the existing and new water treatment plant, and then pump with 2 dual lines to this site. So thankfully, we're not going to have to move it through the water treatment plant. Otherwise, it would be an additional and large expense. And really, what the big issue is that they're going to treat the water on site to make it to the kind of water they want. So they'll have a robust treatment facility on Fufeng's site.
So I guess to wrap it up, the mitigation that was put in place, or the voluntary for the lawn watering, was based on the water treatment plant not flowing the river. Is that correct?
You are correct.
Mr. Leek, Todd Leek.
I'll be as brief as possible. The reason I'm bringing this picture up to the podium is because, to be brief, a picture is worth 1,000 words. This is an example of the forced labor that's going on in Xinjiang province. This is being coordinated by the XPCC, the Xinjiang Production and Construction Corps, which basically takes care of all of the forced labor and re-education camps in Xinjiang province. I'll read to you a letter to the Hong Kong exchange from Fufeng Group Limited, just a part of it, a small part of it. So this announcement, on their letterhead here, this announcement is made by Fufeng Group Limited, the company, together with its subsidiaries known as the group. Fufeng USA is part of that. It says the company has noted that the Uyghur Forced Prevention Labor Act has been signed by the President of the United States of America. On 23rd December 2021, it shall take such an act would, among others, create a presumption, rebuttable presumption, that shall take effect on that date 180 days after the date of the enactment, and all goods from Xinjiang were made with forced labor and therefore prohibited from import to the United States. So this is the import sanction that I'm talking about the law. They go on to say that Fufeng Group will consider to apply for an exemption license in accordance with the local regulations. That's with the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act. They're aware of it. They're going to, they say, apply for an exemption. That exemption is done under the Customs and Border Protection Commissioner. That is the only source of vetting that you will have that they are or are not engaging in the supply chain or directly engaging in forced labor. They go on to say that shareholders and prospective investors that we just saw here up today, of who's invested in this company. Shareholders and prospective investors are advised to exercise caution when dealing in the shares and other securities of the company. By the order of the board, Fufeng Group Limited, Li Suchen, Chairman. So that's the 28th of December, 2021. So the point here is that I'm asking the board, the council here, to table this matter until such time as you know this company does not engage in forced labor or supply chain forced labor. That will be provided as a public document by the Commissioner of Customs and Border Protection by July of 2022. That is if Fufeng decides to provide clear and convincing evidence to the Customs and Border Protection that they are clear of forced labor. They'll get that license. So that you will know, you will have a document from the federal government that will clarify this situation for you. But I'm asking you now to table this until you know for sure, because it don't look good.
Thank you, Mr. Leake.
There's forced labor in China. Fufeng sources their corn most likely from a Chinese Communist Party and endorsed paramilitary construction company.
All right, Mr. Beauclair, am I saying that right? I've had some emails with you, but I don't know how to pronounce the last name, so.
You did it correctly. Thank you, sir.
Please.
Council. I come before you, Sean Beauclair, 146, Stephen, Minnesota, so not only am I out of state, right, from the other state, right. The reason why I come before you is a couple of issues that haven't been addressed before, and that's related to the corn basis, right. Just give you a little background on how important this is, right. I've been investing in value add for over 30 years, right, 6 different corn plants, right, 2 different startups. So I've been in your shoes, kind of, right, on both sides of this table here. So let me speak currently as I understand it, the Grand Forks Economic Development Corporation has published, if the plant is built, it'll be a 40 cents increase in corn basis. And I know the farmers behind me understand, I just want to make sure all the non-farmers are on board what a basis is. So you have a futures price, like corn in Chicago, we'll say it's $6.50, and then you have a local market price is a cash price we actually receive. So there's a difference. So let's just say it's $6.50, right? 20 cents less here, under, right? Is a 20-cent basis. So the farmer's going to receive $6.30, right? 20 cents difference. Please nod your heads, right?
Yeah.
We're on board.
Yeah, and generally related to transportation costs and other various costs, right?
Correct. So if the plant is built, what excuse me, sir, what they're saying is that the overall would increase 40 cents. Every farmer will receive 40 cents more per bushel, right, for the corn delivered to that plant over historically, right? So instead of receiving, right, the 20 cents under, we receive 20 over, right, 40 cents improvement. Does that make sense there? See some ads. So let me understand, when I've seen the conversations before here and people act, I get the impression that it's subjective what will happen versus objective. Now, I'll give you an example of subjective. If we said who had the nicest shirt in the room, subjective, right, we'd all have different opinion. Objective would be weight, right? If I brought a scale in and who is the lightest person in the room, we all could stand on the scale, right? Subjective, objective. Corn basis impact is a very objective thing. Very objective. It's a science, it's an engineer. Right, so currently, right, in Ag Week article, right, Dr. Frayne Olson went to college with me, NDSU Ag Economics. He said, hey, time out, right, if the plant is built based on other plants in the region, you'd see a 10 to 20 cents improvement, right? So why is that all important? So if we stick the low number, right, 40 cents improvement, and Dr. Olson saying 20, there's a 20 cents bushel difference, right? So why does 20 cents matter so much, right? So you're talking about grinding 25 million bushels a year, right? That's $5 million, right? $5 million difference in 1 year, right? When you run these projects that I've been involved in, you run them over 10 years, right? You do pro farmers financials over 10 years. 10 times 5, right? $50 million, right? Would we all agree that $50 million is material to this project? This is real money? Okay. All right. You'll see, right? So in the previous projects I involved with, and this starts to concern me, after we hired our attorney, right, and like for example in Hankinson, we put in $50,000, right, it took $1 million at-risk capital. One of the first things we did was hire a company that is an expert, right? And I defined an expert in that area, right? Recognized by its peers, unbiased, history of providing accurate information, right? If you went to a court of law to be considered an expert. When I see the Grand Forks economic development person, the number they use, you couldn't get any further from an expert, right? You couldn't. And you're making, in my opinion, based on boards I've served on, right, you're making a financial projection, right? You're asking the community to buy into this economic incentive. I take this, when I serve on a board, right, I'm very concerned not only about my money, about my reputation, right? Given what I know about corn basis studies, right, for example, we hired a company called Pro Exporter. Most of you probably never heard of them. Reader's Digest version, what John Deere is to tractors, Caterpillar is to construction equipment, UND is to hockey, right, best of breed, right? If you're going to hire
I don't know why you brought that up, but yeah, please.
Right. Okay, we're with it. So with that being said, like when we built Hankinson, North Dakota, you know what the estimated basis impact was down there? Right? 5 cents. You know what the actual number came out at? 4 cents. Right? 4 cents. And it wasn't a guess. Grand Forks will have a completely different set of numbers. Completely different set of numbers. Right? In preparation for this, and bear with me, I think this is important, very important. Right? I contacted, I'd say, roughly 1 billion bushels of corn that's processed and asked them, what have you seen from corn basis studies done? Right? Anywhere from 5 cents to the max of 25 cents. 5 cents to 25 cents, right? And I consider this people who always spell basis with an I, never an E, right? People who are experts in their field, right? So when I look at you, all your professions, it concerns me that you don't realize the importance of this and what you're communicating to the marketplace. So bear with me on this. So when I served on the board, when we hired our attorney, right, you'll see at the bottom there, I said, you know, he basically communicated there's wrong, there's dumb, and there's stupid, right? In other words, I know it's wrong to communicate a 40-cent basis to you guys, because there's no way that's true. Nowhere I did it, because I'm not an expert, right? You know what, when he explained dumb to me, it's trust, right? Trust in one another, right? There's no way I would want my reputation at risk for that number, right? And finally, right, this is the attorney we're paying $300 an hour to explain things to us, right? He took 30 minutes to do it. I can do it in 3, right? Finally, he said, you know what stupid is, as it relates to this? Doing something over again that's dumb, right? So you guys not correcting this is dumb, it's stupid. I would not serve, right, in any of these positions, because you know why? Mr. Gossett, can you tell me what fraud is? Can you give me a definition of fraud? I don't need a definition because I know from second grade, from my parents teaching me, this is wrong. Bear with me on this, people. We all share the same laws. We do not share the same values. Please pay attention to what people are not saying as it relates to your partner, right? Can you figure this out? If you're going to build $200 to $300 million investment, do you think you understand what the corn basis impact is going to be? Do you think you would understand that? Anybody I know with $200 to $300 million who's going to invest in a corn process facility would know that, right? I see an awful lot of somber faces here. My point is, right, how poor exporter, right? Right now we got $50 million apart. You know what the study cost? $40,000. Do you think we should spend the money, right, for our community so we have an accurate information? Does anybody object to that? Moving on, right, the second thing, I heard a lot of discussion about Fufeng, right? There's two things that concern me, right? And again, pay attention to what wasn't said this evening. Corporate governance. Corporate governance, when I served on the boards, that was a big issue. Do you know who controls 38.5% of Fufeng? Shouldn't come as a surprise. It's the founder and CEO of the company, right? You know who roughly contains another 1.5%? His son-in-law, right? They're both on the board, right? I'm pretty good with fourth grade math, right? It took me to seventh grade to fully get my arms around it. Who do you think controls Fufeng? Really? It's not that difficult. Do you think they have the same governance in corporate as we have in America over in China? They have one independent director, right? The company is run and is controlled by one individual in China. When you read online, right, it sounds like he has association with the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP. As you can imagine, some people are not big fans of the Chinese Communist Party. Why? Human rights violations related to the Uyghurs, right, to the Uyghurs. Roughly, do you know how many are in, quote, camps over there, retrainment camps? 1 million of them, more than the entire population of North Dakota. Some of you follow Senator Kramer, Senator Hoeven, who I have a great deal of respect with. Follow them on Twitter. You know who they appeared with? Right? They call it Ennis Freedom. Former NBA player that stood up to, right, the NBA and said, look it, NBA is big in China. The Uyghurs are being mistreated. It's human rights violation. Right? So it's a big issue. Right? Moving on, I'll wrap up here. Right? Because these are big issues. Do you know what CFA stands for? Anybody in the room? I'm thinking there's more than a couple people. It's Center for Foreign Investment in the United States. It's a Department of the U.S. Treasury, right? Department of the U.S. Treasury. For example, right, I'm a farmer. You see about Chinese land, people purchasing land in China. That's the agency it has to go through, right? Clearly, they are tied into 7 different agencies, Department of Defense, Homeland Security, etc., trade. That's who needs to vent, Fufeng. You know why it's going to occur? I had a very nice conversation with someone from the North Dakota Department of Commerce. Have you ever been mansplained to before? right? That's the way my conversation started out with this individual. I did a little teaching before. You know why teachers look smart? They know the answers to the questions before they ask them. That basically what was the conversation that occurred with the individual out in Bismarck. He committed to me, please double check, please follow up, to get back on vetting them, right? And there's one other request. He said he would do it. Right?
Thank you, Mr.
Again,
Beauclair.
I know what I know what I don't know. Please take the time, Ronald Reagan had an expression, right? Trust, verify, and then sign. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Craig Spicer, would you like to go first?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, Craig Spicer, I'll give you my address. And it's North Washington Street, Grand Forks. Lifelong resident. Started my business 40 years ago. And the reason I'm here is because of concerns. Lots of concerns. Not because I want to get into a personal battle with people, but because I want to state my concerns. So that's why I'm here. That's why I've been here the whole time. And I've got a lot of things that I'm not very good at this. I'm just going to jump around, but I will voice my concerns. So I guess the first concern is that you would probably invest in a sound system. I'm deaf in one ear. As these actions have gone on, I'm sitting right in the audience, and you know something? It's not fair. It's not fair to anybody in this room, and I don't mean to, get on anybody, but if you can't hear what's going on, you're kind of at a disadvantage. And I don't know if that's intentional, or we can't, it's 2022, right? Let's get a sound system. Okay, that's out of the way. I'm sorry about that.
I like that one. I agree with you there.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate it.
We're doing well so far. All right.
All right. So the first concern I have is with the Fufeng plant and the Wiggers and the whole thing of how do we know? Well, as I got into this thing, I didn't know anything about this project. And as I went on, my concerns grew, which, I'm not sleeping at night because it's like, this is not fair that they're taking our tax money and devoting it to another company just because they can. Okay, so I'm jumping around here, but it's like the water. Okay, so there's another concern. Okay, don't worry about the drought. We can take care of the water. We have it all covered. Okay, if we can't get enough water out of Ashtabula, we'll get the water from Agassiz. Okay, does that mean just because we can get the water? Maybe we should get the water out of Lake Michigan because we can. Let's just keep burning up our resources for why? For this company that comes to town and just is going to pollute our air. They're going to pollute our land. They've taken farmland. They've turned it into commercial land and I don't know if that's a red flag to me, another concern. So you manipulate the process of, let's say, you're not supposed to sell agricultural land to a foreign country. To me, that's pretty solid stuff. We need this country to stay with us, especially when we have concerns about the people that are buying it. So you voice those concerns a little bit, and then people kind of say, well, he's a little radical, or he's this or that. I'm not coming from that part of it. I'm coming from the fact that I want to stay in Grand Forks because I love it. I want to be able to build with you, Mr. Mayor, and I know that's what you got in mind. But I asked you this last week. When you ran on your platform, and this isn't personal, you said you would help small business, you were for small business, and the first thing that comes down the pipe is a frickin' excuse my language, how many billion or $1 million company comes in and they're not paying their own way. Okay, I'm gonna jump around a little bit again because it kind of works that way. So we bring this company in at a cost of whatever to us, and then it comes out of taxpayer money, and people like me that have been in business for 20 years here, 40 years, whatever, they get the bad part of the deal, and then pretty soon they're not in business. So then you lose those people. And that's my other concern. Now, everybody knows how the game works, okay, and I don't want to do this, but the biggest part of this thing is I've approached the people that the property got, that they sold the property. And I've asked them, I said, tell me what you know and how you feel in this, and I had a conversation with a couple of them. And they told me that they thought it was okay. Okay, now I bought into that a little bit. I mean, I thought that was an okay deal. But those people are the people that tend to gain the most from this. They sold the property for $26,000 an acre. Come right out and take a look at my place and give me $26,000 an acre, and I'll even do better than that. I'll give it to you for $25,000, just a round number. Okay, so red flag, I'm sorry, $26,000 an acre. Well, just something's not right, okay? So then, as you look down the road a little bit, and you know who these people are, you've known them most of your life too. They know who they are. I'm just calling them out a little bit because I'll tell you why. Because they not only are going to get the $26,000 an acre, but because of the businesses that they are in, they will probably get contracts for 5 years or whatever to do this work around there. You know, so, and that's not a bad deal, don't get me wrong, but that's just the opposite side of where I come from. What's in it for me? Where's my incentives? Where was my incentives 20 years ago when I started my business? It just, you know, very concerning. So, we're going to go back to a couple other things here. Trust, okay? So it'd be great if we could trust everybody that we just, you know, kind of run into a little bit here and there. We all know better than that. These people that are on this board and this commission with this company, I don't know them. I can't trust them. Just say, oh, well, they're going to tell me this, they're going to tell me that. You know, I can't buy into that unless I trust them. And right now, with the climate of what's going on in our society, my wife has called, she's been on the phone, she's working this thing to death. She's called every agency, every congressman, every senator, and you know something? What do they tell her? Just like what we're saying here, like Bob got him said, we get no answers. Nobody wants to talk about it. That makes me nervous. That's a red flag to me. I mean, I just have one of these things that, you know, something's not right here. So when you feel not right about it, how can I believe you? And, you know, you sell this thing, great. And that's, you know, and I don't mean to pick on you, but it's like walking up to a used car salesman and saying, look at this baby here. Say, hey, everything's great about boom, boom, boom. Tell me something negative that you found out that you really have a hard time adjusting to, Mr. Phelan. I'm just, you know what I'm saying? It's not all a bed of roses. If it is, it makes me more suspect to you. I can't help it. That's life, that's the way it is. So, if you don't turn things around and let people gain some trust, I don't think this thing should pass. We're not getting any guarantees. We're not getting anything on record. We want you to have some safeguards here. We want you to have some watchdogs. We want you to do whatever you can because you're working this thing so hard that you say you're going to cover all of their problems. But you're working so hard for their problems, you don't have time for our problems. And we got a lot of them. I sure don't want to see, and I know these people personally, I do not want to see these businesses closed down, and I don't want to see a lot of people in the North End leave town because of this project. So it's a balance, and I think you said that last week, Mr. Buczynski. You know, you're trying to save us, you're trying to make this project work, you're trying to work things out. I respect you for that. Now, the other thing is, if we go back and we talk about pollution, and we've been over this before, my comment on the pollution is, okay, one more, and then one more, and then one more. Okay, where do we stop? Where pretty soon our town has a reputation of being just a stink hole. And it'll come to that. And I didn't mean to be rude last week when I brought that container in, but that's as close to the bottom line of what's going to happen if we pass this thing through. And nobody wanted any, it's okay when it's in your backyard, No, it's fine over there. No, okay, I'm the guy that put the signs out in the south end. I don't care. I got nothing to lose. The only reason I did that was to make awareness to the people in the south end. Can I have a show of hands who's from the south end? Okay. Well, there's a split there. You put your hand down, you're my son. I don't know why you moved to the south end, but I won't hold it against you. Thank you. Just a point, okay? We are in a position of being out of control of any of this. So we take what we can and use it the best we can. And that's why I'm here. So I hope you not only vote with your head and the numbers and the sales pitches and all of that, but here.
Thank you. Ms. Spicer?
No, I've had everything covered.
All right. Mr. Perkins?
I'm not sure how I can follow that. Dexter Perkins, 6571 Charlie Ray Drive. Mr. Sandy brought up the point a little while ago that people keep coming here and repeating the same old arguments. And I'm not sure whether he was making an observation or whether he was complaining. And somebody else pointed out that people wouldn't make the same old arguments if they got any sort of response from you, if questions were answered and things. So I'm going to make my argument you've heard before very brief before I go on to another point. This project, if it is operating in Grand Forks, will be the largest polluter in this part of the country. Why do we want it? It will produce an incredible amount of carbon dioxide, which will add to the problem of global climate change when everybody who knows about climate change says we need to decrease carbon dioxide. And if we go ahead with this project, we're saying, Danny, Katie, Brett, Jeannie, all of you are saying that you don't care about what our actions do to other people in other parts of the world. That, to my mind, I couldn't live with that. That's immoral. It's bad. But it's not just the people who object to the project who come here and repeat the same things, because we've heard Todd, who I know is a very sincere guy, say the same stuff every week. This is a great project. Trust me, we'll work through the problems, and we're all going to, hear organ music, and the sun's going to come out, and we'll dance as our taxes go down. And we've heard this, and it's been repeated and asserted by multiple people. But that doesn't mean it's correct. Just because you say something many times doesn't mean it's correct. There are so many unanswered questions about this project. Was it February 2nd, I think you produced a document that listed the permits that we're going to get? We don't know what's in those permits. We don't know what the permitting agencies are going to require us to do. Good question. Finances. I saw some numbers tonight on one of your slides that I hadn't seen before. And what's the phrase? George Bush. Voodoo economics. It looked like voodoo economics to me because on the plus side, crediting Fufeng was fees paid for water. That doesn't pay back the infrastructure investment. And in fact, if you looked on that chart, the special assessments they're paying come nowhere near paying back the infrastructure that is going to be built to facilitate their operation. The problem is we've not seen a financial statement. Nobody's seen one. There isn't one. I know you're sincere, and I know Mr. Lund is sincere, and you believe this is for the best of our city, but I hope you guys on the city council want to see a financial statement. Show us why this makes good economic sense, because we have not seen that. And so I cannot imagine how you guys could go ahead and vote on this, missing all this crucial information. I think Mr. Phelan here spent 10 minutes telling us all the stuff that we haven't done yet. I think we should do that stuff before we vote on whether to go ahead. throughout this, I guess I'm being naive. I kind of trust people too much sometimes, but it's been implied during the last 4 weeks that this is only an agreement to get the project going, moving forward, a development agreement. And I think, Mayor Bochinski, you said earlier tonight that that was the case. And the implication has always been there that if we decide in the end that we really don't want to go forward, then we don't have to. But this weekend, I asked 2 members of the city council, and they forwarded it to Mr. Phelan, who responded and told me that if we approve this development agreement, we're all in. This is not just a preliminary thing, and we have a chance to pull out later. And they told me, all 3 of them, that we're committed to the project if we approve this agreement. Unless Fufeng violates one of the requirements put on them. And I don't think you guys have anywhere near enough information to make that commitment at this time. And I say this because I hope that if we delay it for a reasonable amount of time and all these questions are answered, that there'll be enough things that come to light to convince you that it's a bad project. I mean, you know what my #1 concern is. But I think there's a lot of other reasons. And I just don't want to see us rush through and approve this when we need answers to so many questions before you can even evaluate whether it makes money. That's pretty simple and basic. So I urge you not to vote. I urge you to kill it, but I don't think you're going to do it. But I urge you, don't vote on this now. If it's a good plan now, it'll be a good plan in 2 weeks or 4 weeks or 6 weeks. And we can come back and visit it later while we collect the information we need to find out whether this is something we want to do.
Thank you, Mr. Perkins. Got Mr. Wade Berg.
Didn't expect to get on here so soon. I'm on 1105 Belmont. I guess some of my main concerns, there's obviously a lot of different stakeholders to this project. It seems to me there's 2 major beneficiaries of this. That'd be the investors and the suppliers to this. I'm not against that. What I want to know is who came up with kind of the, I guess in private enterprise we would use something like internal rate of return as far as whether we're going to do a project or not. I would assume this economic development corporation probably coming up with most of the analysis on this project. Is that correct? Is that information available to the public?
Yeah, I mean, that's listed tonight on there. It's under the Economic Development Corporation. It's been on at least a few of the agendas.
Okay, and I guess where would I find that? Where would the public find that?
Go to the Grand Forks, Grand Forks gov.com. Is that the website, Todd?
It's at this meeting. I think we've attached all the information that we've presented over the last several weeks.
All right, thank you for that. The concern is, obviously there's major beneficiaries of this project, but the concern is that as a citizen, all the other citizens here, if the cost of this project has a substantial benefit to us as taxpayers of Grand Forks. And we're outlaying a lot of money for this project. How are we recouping this? And if that information is in there, it bears consideration for us to examine that more clearly. But just from looking at it from the outside, it doesn't seem like there's a great return just for your typical Grand Forks resident. I know I work with farmers every day. Having more competition, and we had a gentleman here talking about basis earlier, whether it's 20 cents or 40 cents, it's going to be a benefit to the farmer. They're one of the beneficiaries of this. I'm not against that. Even if it's a Chinese company, I don't think that matters either, as long as they're not in any of this direct involvement with these Uyghur population and all that. That's kind of a moral issue to me. But anyway, I'm just wondering if this is getting rammed through. Are there any conflicts of interest in this development committee and so on? There's just some concerns there. And it just all seems very rushed. So those are my concerns. And I'm not really here to change anyone's mind, but I don't like the rushing into it. It does seem a little concerning. But thank you.
Oh, thank you. All right, we got Frank Matichek.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Council. Frank Matichek, 4150 Columbia Road North. I want to talk a little bit about the plating and the zoning that's going to happen with this project. It's really interesting because most times when developers come into the city, whether they're local or from someplace else, they get a piece of property, they develop the piece that they want to, and they leave the rest of it because they don't know what they're going to do with it. Or if they do know what they're going to do with it, they get a PUD, a planned unit development, and so they have the whole thing to develop. We've been trying to get, I think somebody asked if the plant was on 40 acres or whatever. We still haven't got the actual acreage of the plant. Now, there's a notice to competitors of hearing of application for tax incentives. I believe you guys will be hearing it on the 5th of, or the 7th of March, right here at 5:30?
I believe so. Sound right, Todd? Yeah.
Yeah, okay. And why is that important? Because, first of all parcels in the county have a tax ID number, okay? Like this property, when it was farmland, Mr. Adams had a tax number, Mr. Bridgeford had a tax number, Mr. Opp had a tax number paid. Okay, what this is doing is changing the tax numbers, okay, into different parcels. And what it's doing is it's taking the entire piece of 370 acres and putting it in 5 new taxable ID parcels, okay? 2 of them are small. A is 5.53 acres, D is 19.9 acres, okay? I assume those are ponds, I don't know. But if you look at the legal descriptions of each one, the plant should be on the southwest corner or southwest part of the parcel. So that would make it at 127.28 acres. That would be the new plant. Okay, which leaves 2 other parcels. One is which 111 acres and the other one is 105 acres. I find that really strange. And the reason I find it strange is why would you leave those larger parcels? Why wouldn't you leave it open? It tells me that something else is going to be developed here. Big other stuff, other factories. Once you get a zone, and they're going to get an I-1 or an I-2, carte blanche to do whatever you want as long as it's a permitted use. Yes, the city, you have to have a site plan. Yes, you have to have a building permit. But if you meet all the criteria, they can't stop you from building. That's been decided by courts all over the country. Once you have that zone, and as long as you comply with what's in there, you can do whatever you want. And that's why I'd like to know, is there plans for the rest of the property? Besides, yeah, we're going to develop ag industrial park. You know, everybody says we don't get any answers. You know, you haven't even told me if my 127 acres is right for the corn wet milling plant. You guys must know how many acres they're going to take. I mean, I don't get it. But I hope you can look at that and try to make some reason out of it, because I'm not. Thank you. By the way, if you ever, every time I'm up here, I never ask you. If you want to ask me any questions or shoot some darts at me, I'm ready. So, whatever. If you have any questions.
Thank you.
Do you understand what I'm talking about here?
Well, I understand that you're saying that there's multiple parcels and you're trying to figure out what,
Well,
if they're going to be combined in a PUD. I believe that's the case.
I would assume the plat is going to show these 5 parcels.
I believe so. It's going to go to planning, and I believe they're looking at a PUD route. So
Right.
that'll come before you, not too long.
But are you the guys that decide this? You should know that.
Mr. Gosted, please, why don't you take this one?
If he's referring to the notice to competitors, that's for the pilot with respect to the buildings only. And it's
There's
just
nothing to do with the
describing the area where the buildings would be. It was just to provide notice to people as to the pilot and the public hearing on March 7th. That was the intention.
All right, thank you, sir. All right, we got Mr. Nagel, TJ Nagel.
Mayor, I think I saw
TJ
TJ leave.
All right, and I know there were some other people, I know there's some supporters, some other farmers, some other people, and if anybody wants to talk, step up, but if anybody that wants to at least raise their hand, I know we got some new faces here that are in support, so we've got an idea of that. Is there a group here that is in support and sees benefit of this out there?
Got someone over here.
All right, now, is anybody wanting to come out and speak at this time, or are we ready for us to move on and vote? All right, why don't we, at this point, if council has any further comment?
Mayor, is this back?
It's back to you, Mr. Veen, yep.
We're back to here. I'd like to just make a couple closing comments. If I could.
Please.
Mayor, you know, and Todd also, that back in probably late November, early December, I came forth, you guys were already thinking that with a whole group of questions and concerns that I felt I didn't have answers for. Initially, I was looking at it, it was rushed, and there's a lot of data that needs to be identified and questions answered. And many of those included a focus on infrastructure, we'll say. Street and highways, what's the ADT, what's the impact to the intersections, what's the impact to the life of the streets. The rail, I was working with rail utilization, the closing and crossings of streets like Gateway Drive, water, raw water availability, the issues with the rural water system, how we were going to connect there, wastewater, stormwater, city flood protection. I mean, all of those things, I was worried about what the impacts were going to be, what are the consequences, what are the unintended consequences that may be a part of that. There were probably other aspects of it too that we're looking at it. A big thing was, what are the risks that we as the community are taking on as a part of this project, and what do we do to mitigate those risks? Those were big things, even how Northern Plains nitrogen would be involved. So there were a lot of issues that are out there and serious concerns we had. And as this process has progressed, and that's why I kind of align it with what the motion has been, is there are a number of studies that are now being implemented as a part of the process to be able to answer those questions. Because I could not vote for this project personally unless I have answers to the questions. I got to have those answers to move forward. And so that's why when we were looking at this, I was looking at, do the studies. We've got to have answers to those studies to know what the true impact is going to be for us. And if we don't get answers, then how do I vote for it? That's just the way I'm thinking and the way I'm looking at this personally. And so part of the problem is I was looking at this agreement, and I've learned a little bit as you go, the development agreement is not the end all. It's a part of the process. If we can, because of the development agreement, we have the funding to do the studies that I need to make a decision. So that's a little bit of the issue. I need to have answers before I can ultimately push the project forward. And one of the avenues to do that is take this kind of as a stopgap process to get some answers is through the development agreement. And that's just where I'm sitting. That's why I'm not necessarily a yes, but answering the development agreement is a way to push the project through and get answers to questions. So just a little theory of where I'm from on this.
Thank you, Mr. Veen. Any further comment, council? Start with Mr. Weigel.
I'll be brief, Mayor. I think this is great. We've brought a lot of people together, a lot of people with different views. I've got my former principal in the crowd. She'll tell you I was the best student at St. Mike's K through 5. We've got the sheriff, we got a state senator, state representative, former city attorney, current city attorney. We've got so many people here tonight to talk about a project. And I wish more meetings were like this a little bit, so that we could have conversations, so we could understand what small businesses want, because many times we aren't having these conversations. We aren't talking about this is what small business needs, this is what industrial business needs, this is what farmers need that are near the city of Grand Forks. So I think these things are productive, and I think we learn a lot from what we need, and I think these things bring us close together. I'm with Mr. Veen as well, as I think we all have questions. We all want to understand where this is going, but I also think that you have to invest in a little bit to understand where things are at and get some of the answers to the things that you're searching for. So glad to see the development agreement go forward for the time being, so that we can understand truly what we have and understand some of the things that are going to come out of this eventually.
Thank you, Mr. Weigel. Mr. Weber?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We're looking at the development of a project that will affect our community for decades. There are a lot of important questions to be asked, and a lot of them have been asked tonight. But we should also recognize we have a company that's interested in investing $700 million in our community. 3 of the representatives from that company have patiently sat through the questions, the comments, sometimes very derisive comments tonight. And Mr. Mayor, if I could, could we give them an opportunity if they have any responses, especially, I was wondering if Ms. Armstrong had anything to say about some of the accusations about forced labor, et cetera. But I don't mean to put them on the spot, I just wanted to give them that opportunity. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yep, no problem. Yeah, I guess with that, Mary, if you had anything to add to that, or Mr. Schuterash, especially on the forced labor, any insights that you've gained, obviously being a part of the company and knowing this process, that would be helpful.
Yeah, I'll speak to that. I mean, as we've already, communicated and provided, I mean, it's a, it's not something that we're doing at our Xinjiang factory. We've had third-party audits completed to that effect, way before any discussion of development agreements and things with the city. It was actually more, I would say, proactive before even recent legislation, because of the customers that we're selling in the U.S. and them wanting to have that type of audit in place so that they were comfortable, purchasing those products. And so that's the reason we did it. The customers were satisfied, and as we move forward with, we're still importing and able to, and I know, as it's been mentioned, there'll be additional requirements as we head here into the year, and we're gonna do those filings, and I would foresee that we're gonna be able to continue to sell our products because we'll be found similar to what the audits found.
Eric, you got a mic or anything? How close? So we're having a tough time hearing you. I mean, I don't hate to have you go back over the whole thing again, but can you get a little closer? And Cheryl, is there any more juice we got in the house here? Go all the way to 100. There.
Yes, I can get, or I'm not sure.
Can you start over? Sorry to make you start over. Can you start over from the beginning? We can hear you really well now.
Okay, sorry, I'll have to be close here on the screen. But no, like I mentioned, I mean, the issue with the forced labor, it's it isn't something that we're doing at our Xinjiang factory. As we've discussed and, really openly provided. The audit, that was done last year, that was done by a third party to demonstrate that we weren't. That was, as you're aware, Mayor, it wasn't asked for. It was, proactively provided as we saw the new legislation coming forward and, and asked for, help to direct us in the right direction to do the filings that have been talked about, today. So, that wasn't, like I mentioned, it wasn't a question that was asked that had anything to do with this development agreement and then provided. It was us trying to be proactive and make sure we could get registered as been talked about. I would say that the history of that audit was, even before current legislation was in place, and because we've been importing products for quite some time, and customers request audits like that to make sure that they're comfortable purchasing our ingredients. So that was the history. That's why it was completed. It satisfied those requirements as well.
So you've sent that third party to U.S. firms that you currently do business with? Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah, okay. Anything else you're hoping for, Mr. Weber?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. All right. Yep, President Sandy.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, thank you. I think it's important to say that my intention was not that I didn't appreciate what Mr. Warkup was saying. I think it's very important to understand the concerns of the folks that are going to be special assessed. And frankly speaking, I agree with a lot of what Mr. Warkup has stated tonight. We need to figure this out. We need to take care of the folks that have been in our community for years, and it's not okay for us to unduly burden the folks with special assessments in the Faulkner Township. So I think we need to take care of S&S. I think we need to take care of their neighbors and their neighbors and their neighbors. I think we need to figure that out. And so if that means me or someone else stating that we need to use economic development funds or whatever their funds, because this is a community-wide project and the community should help fit the bill. So if we're going to call this a community project, we need the community to step in. So I, for one, I hear you, Mr. Warkup. I didn't mean to interrupt you. My point was, I understand already, and we as a community need to help figure it out. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, President Sandy. All right, any further comment from council? All right, seeing none, we'll take a vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Opposed, same sign.
Aye.
Motion carries 5-1. Number 5, information items.
5.1, portfolio management summary as of January 31st. And 5.2 is a COVID-19 update.
Thank you. Probably just going to pause for just a minute as it... Actually, why don't we just plug through? You guys good with just going through? I don't see you. Did you have the citizen comments attached, Sherry? Did you have the citizen comments attached? Okay. All right.
It's November 8th, 15th, and 22nd.
Okay, we're going to just take a quick, just a couple minutes here, let it clear out a little bit.
I can't. Okay. My computer's dead.
Just finish it. All right, we're going to go on. Maureen, item 7, approval of minutes and bills.
All right, 7.1 is the vendor list as presented to your agenda.
Got a motion to approve and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign.
And 7.2 of the minutes from November 8th, 15th, and 22nd, 2021.
All those in favor signify by saying aye. Are we actually getting a motion in a second? Approve as is. Thank you, and a second. We got a motion from Weber and a second from Dockler. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Mr. Phelan, I'm going to skip your citizen comments tonight. Is there any comments from any council members tonight?
I have one, please, Mayor.
You got one, Ms. Dockler?
Nobody's going to be able to hear, but I do have a ward meeting for Ward 2 that's going to be held at, going to be held on March 4th from 6 to 8 p.m. At the Public Safety Center. And so I am inviting anyone in Ward 2 or those that would be included in Ward 2 after June to attend, because I think that it's important to have their conversation at the table as well.
Thank you. Ms. Dockler, we'll share that too on the city's page, so that's more information out there. Yeah, please, Ms. Mock.
I just wanted to extend a thank you and congratulations to Earl Haugen, who's retiring after 28 years, 24 years as Executive Director of the MPO.
All right. Mr. Bean, any comments this evening? All right. With that, I'm going to be looking for a motion to adjourn. So moved. Got a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. We are adjourned. Thank you.